Chapter 412. Huimao tilted his head and chewed with gusto. The others didn't want to look anymore after a single glance. The scene sent chills down their spines. After glancing at the mummified biochemical orc, Knight shifted his gaze to the incubation nest covered in a layer of ice crystals. He tapped it with his wrist blade to test the waters before extending his hand to touch it. About 10 centimeters below where Knight's finger touched, there was a biochemical orc that had just broken out of its membrane with its mouth wide open, as if it was going to pounce at him in the next moment. However, its nervousness was frozen by this layer of ice crystals. Knight was beyond amazed when he sensed the analysis information transmitted through the protective suit. These ice crystals were actually just water, but they didn't feel very cold. Moreover, through the analysis of the analyzer, Knight knew that the eggs in this incubation nest basically had no signs of life. The few eggs that were still alive had very weak signs of life and were extinguished in no time. Knight tested the dagger in his hand. He cut off a corner and looked at the biochemical orc that was contained in the cut. This time, there really wasn't a single sign of life. Crunching sounds rang in the air as Wheeze ran back to the frozen nest after finishing the jerky. Then it opened its mouth and began to chew on the food. Knight knocked on the ice crystal he had cut off with his dagger. The force from his hand told him how hard this thing was, which was why he was even more impressed by Huimao's teeth and biting strength. The others were curious when they saw Knight cut off a piece. They flicked out their blades to take a look, curious as to what this thing was. Due to the effect of the water bomb, the water vapor in the surrounding area was forcefully absorbed. Many of the biochemical orcs that were swarming in this direction stayed far away. Those that could not avoid in time had a lot of water absorbed from their bodies, making them look a little shriveled. However, the biochemical orcs near the exit were not affected at all, because there was a wide river next to the pharmaceutical factory, and the humidity was high. However, this blank period wouldn't last long. Due to geographical reasons, in addition to the explosion of the pharmaceutical factory and the excavation of Sillin and the others, the underground laboratory had been unsealed. Moisture would seep in again. "Let's look at other places," Sillin said. The others who were having fun cutting acknowledged, and threw away the hard pieces they had cut off. However, they kept some small pieces in their hands to study when they were free. None of this was hidden from Sillin, nor did they have any intention of hiding it. After they were done dealing with things here, they walked over to where Ci Jincheng and the others were. That place used to be some experimental workshops, and they could see many dried corpses along the way. Those were the dried corpses that Ci Jincheng and the others had killed, and then forcefully absorbed water to form. They had seen it before, so Knight and the others were no longer surprised when they saw it again. "What do you think? Did you find anything?" Sillin asked. Ci Jincheng waved a device in his hand. "The data we can repair is limited, but this trip was not in vain." Although he did not find any news about the dream taper, he had obtained quite a lot of information about the biochemical orcs. The biggest threat at the current stage was indeed the dream taper. However, nobody could tell if there would be more disasters like this after the dream taper. There should be many underground incubation lair in some of Miracle's bases. Puff. A metal piece flew out from Cheto's side and nailed an animal that looked like a four-legged snake to death. Ci Jincheng and the others didn't find it strange. Cheto had already killed a couple of these animals here. Although they weren't biochemical orcs, they could have been animals from this lab in the past. Therefore, they weren't too puzzled by Cheto's actions. However, Sillin sensed that something was wrong. He sensed a strange signal wave before he even entered the planet. After he arrived here, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Moreover, he felt that someone was watching over everything here. Those animals were strange. It was only after Cheto killed them that the feeling of being watched in Sillin's heart decreased a little. "What's wrong?" Lung asked. "I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching us," Sillin answered. "Now that you mention it, it is a little. However, I'm definitely not the one being watched." Lung crossed his arms and scratched as if he was rubbing goosebumps. If someone was watching him from the shadows, Lung would have noticed it himself. Right now, the feeling of being watched wasn't that strong, so it was obvious that the person behind him wasn't paying attention to him. Lung was certain of this. "There's someone else?" The others exclaimed in surprise and looked around vigilantly. Ci Jincheng didn't see any other humans through the life signature scan on his protective mask. There were only some scattered biochemical orcs and other small animals. However, Silin Helong definitely had his reasons for saying so. There must be someone watching them from the shadows. Was it someone from Miracle? Or was it someone else? Silin looked around and said, "Let's not worry about that for now. After we're done gathering information here, we'll go check if there are similar underground incubators in other places. If there are, we'll take them out immediately." Amen, this is indeed a top priority. Ci Jincheng looked at the information Kong Man sent back. An aircraft had crashed on this planet in the past 2 days, and it was probably from the Central Transit Star. However, there was no virus spread, so it was possible that the people who came here weren't infected. It was also possible that they had been taken care of. In short, there were no signs of virus spreading, but there were definitely battles happening in other places. Let's go out and blow this place up. The other 2 large pharmaceutical factories must have some secrets. Ci Jincheng put away the instruments in his hands and returned along the road. When they saw that frozen incubator, Ci Jincheng and the others were also stunned. Combining the scene before them with what they saw earlier, it was impossible for them not to be shocked. Right now Huimao was still clinging to it and gnawing on it. However, since they were in a hurry, they didn't stay for long. Silin twisted Huimao off the frozen incubator and waited for night to install the bomb before they quickly retreated. Without the biochemical orcs to continue incubating, the new generation of biochemical orcs wouldn't be able to reproduce so quickly. Right now the number of biochemical orcs was 1 by 1, and there wouldn't be any new ones for the time being. This did reduce a lot of pressure. After they retreated from the underground lab, Kong Man had already flown the aircraft over after receiving the notice, and descended above the pharmaceutical factory. They still split into 2 groups, one group to cover, the other to jump onto the landing boards. Some of the surrounding biochemical orcs saw the scene and gathered over. However, after Silin and the others jumped onto the landing boards, the aircraft started pulling up. Knight raised his finger and started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Explode. Boom. A huge explosion sounded. It started from the underground lab and blew up some of the rocks on the surface of the Earth's crust. When the explosion spread out, the biochemical orcs that ran over couldn't escape at all, and were sucked into the explosion and blown to smithereens. The entire pharmaceutical factory was now truly uprooted from the roots. The frozen incubator was also reduced to ashes in this explosion. The people hiding in the residential area saw the scene and felt hope rise in their hearts again. They knew that the biochemical orcs came from there, but they couldn't get close at all. Even if they did, the people who risked their lives to get there couldn't find the biochemical orcs' nests. This explosion had greatly reduced the gloom in their hearts. Let's go to the next pharmaceutical factory. The people who entered the aircraft looked at the other 2 large pharmaceutical factories on the screen, and the reports sent back by the detectors. There weren't a large number of biochemical orcs there, only a small number of biochemical beasts. Then there were the battles between local forces. We didn't detect any signal from the incubator. There might be signal interference too. But where should we go next? These 2 pharmaceutical factories are still quite far away from each other, Kong Man said. The 3 largest pharmaceutical factories were located in 3 different places on the planet, forming a tripartite balance. However, it was unknown whether all 3 of these pharmaceutical factories were supported by Miracle. But it was true that these 3 pharmaceutical factories had once ruled the planet. This one, Silin pointed at one of the factories and said, "Let's go to this factory first. I think we'll find something." Kong Man looked at Ci Jincheng. Ci Jincheng nodded. "If no one else has any objections, then let's go to this factory first." The others didn't care. They didn't know the difference between the 2 factories anyway. However, the battles in the areas where these 2 factories were located were pretty intense. Even the internal battles were in full swing, and they weren't affected by the biochemical orcs here at all. But if the new biochemical orcs hatched from the underground incubator and spread to the other side, it would be too late for them to fight back. The pharmaceutical factory that Sillin had pointed out looked more thoroughly destroyed than the other two, but Sillin could sense a strange signal coming from it. He wanted to go and see what was going on. He had a feeling that he would definitely gain a lot this time. The destruction over there was more complete, but the battle over there was quite intense. It didn't lose to the people in the other two places at all. What are they fighting over? Pride asked. The area where the pharmaceutical factory was located was already so destroyed, but the forces there were still fighting over that territory. They knew the situation over there from some of the intercepted communications. The three forces were fighting over the ruined pharmaceutical factory. The problem was, what was there to fight over in a pile of ruins? There must be some secret down there. From those people's communications, we only know that there's also a base down there. They think that there must be some flying tools down there, that's why they're fighting so desperately. C.I. Jincheng explained to everyone. Since the management of the pharmaceutical factory had taken away all the flying tools that could leave the planet when they left, the people here can only attack that underground base if they want to take refuge outside without flying tools. There's really flying tools down there? The others were puzzled. C.I. Jincheng shook his head. I don't know. There's a barrier around the pharmaceutical factory, so we'll only know when we get there. But one thing is for sure, there's definitely a secret down there. We just don't know what it is. Those people couldn't find the secret down there no matter how hard they fought? Sillin asked curiously. Before they figured it out, they forbade anyone from stepping foot into the pharmaceutical factory. However, they mentioned that thing in their communications. I don't know what this word means. C.I. Jincheng looked at the information in his hands and said. Sillin thinks for a moment. Then let's drag a few people over and interrogate them first. After all, we won't get much substance even if we steal communications. We might as well drag a few key personnel over and interrogate them. Makes sense, I agree. Knight preferred direct methods like this. Drag who? Pride asked. If we're going to drag the leader, of course. The spaceplane flew towards the pharmaceutical factory that Sillin had mentioned. Meanwhile, the battle there was still going on. The three forces had never stopped fighting each other for a single moment. On a mountain near the city cluster where the pharmaceutical factory was located, inside a building that could be considered luxurious compared to the buildings here. Boss, those people snuck towards the pharmaceutical factory again today. If we hadn't discovered them early, they probably would have succeeded. A young man said angrily inside the office. A middle-aged man sat behind a square table in front of the young man. He listened to his subordinate's report with his hands crossed and rubbed the ring on his thumb. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment as he listened to his subordinate's report. Then he waved his hand and said solemnly, If they sneak in again and ignore the rules, don't do anything and let them go. You guys just follow behind. You're saying, if they're in a hurry, then let them deal with that monster first. They all want to be the fisherman who benefits from the fight, but none of them have the patience. We might as well wait and let them go first. The young man was a quick-witted person. He immediately understood the middle-aged man's words. I understand. I'll instruct them now. Seeing that the middle-aged man did not say anything else, he excused himself and closed the door. After the young man left, the middle-aged man sitting on the chair frowned and thought for a moment. Then he let out a long sigh and got up to walk to the wall next to him. He pressed his palm against a spot, and a light flashed on it. Then he pulled the wall up from the bottom. On the other side of the wall was a warehouse. There was a small aircraft in the warehouse. However, the aircraft was too small and could not accommodate many people. Moreover, the equipment was very simple and crude. It would be dangerous to travel long distances with it. According to the information he had received, the threat had already begun to spread on this planet. Outside this planet, there were virus disasters on other planets. No one knew what would happen to this planet in the next moment. Everyone wanted to find an aircraft to leave this place and find a new shelter. However, this was his route. It was the territory that they had worked hard to obtain for generations. It would be a waste to abandon all these resources and manpower. The middle-aged man caressed the aircraft. If the situation was really serious, he could only abandon everything here and leave. As he was thinking, the middle-aged man suddenly saw a shadow flash past the outer shell of the aircraft. Who is it? The middle-aged man quickly took out his gun and looked around vigilantly. However, he did not find anything unusual after looking around. However, when he turned to look at the aircraft again, he found a cat squatting on it. It was a gray fat cat. The middle-aged man raised his gun and pointed it at Huimao. His face was twitching nervously. Perhaps it was because he knew some of the secrets of the pharmaceutical factory here. Compared to humans, those strange animals made him feel more threatened. Huimao did not react to the gun in the middle-aged man's hand. Instead, he opened his round eyes and looked at him quietly. Because the lighting in this place was dimmer, Huimao's pupils appeared larger. When it was curious, excited, or when it saw prey, its pupils would also dilate. These factors combined made the middle-aged man feel that this pair of eyes was particularly strange. It was not as calm and composed as it was in front of his subordinates. He did not shoot immediately. He was not sure of the origin of this cat. He knew that some animals should not be provoked. If they were provoked, there would be no way out. Therefore, with the middle-aged man's cautious personality, he only raised the gun and pointed it at Huimao. He did not pull the trigger. When he pointed at Huimao, he gradually retreated. When he retreated to the wall, he used his other hand to pat the wall, but his eyes were fixed on Huimao. The middle-aged man could feel the switch on the wall with his eyes closed, so he did not doubt that he had hit the wrong place. However, after a few pats, the wall did not respond at all. Cold sweat dripped from the middle-aged man's forehead. Where did you come from? Huimao ignored him. Seeing that Huimao did not respond, the middle-aged man looked for a few more exit switches. He even tried the switch that controlled the aircraft's takeoff port, which had not been used for many years, but it did not respond at all. All the exit switches had failed, and he was trapped there. Most importantly, this place was soundproof. The people inside could not hear the sounds outside. If there was a shooting inside, the people outside would not hear it either. Huimao was watching the middle-aged man in front of it, looking for a place to escape. It was so anxious that it was sweating profusely. It was squatting there calmly, enjoying the fun. "Stop wasting time," a voice said. The voice wasn't loud, but it was very clear in this quiet place. This made the middle-aged man even more nervous than before. He looked around, but there was no one else. There were no alarms, no scanners, and no intruders. Who is it? Who is it? The middle-aged man shouted. He had just shouted when he discovered that the cat that was squatting on the aircraft had disappeared. Then a shadow flashed by. The middle-aged man did not have the time to shoot at all, and he did not see it clearly at all. Thud. A muffled sound later, the middle-aged man collapsed. Huimao tilted his head and looked at the man on the ground. Then he turned around and said innocently, "I really didn't do it on purpose. I didn't think that this guy would be so weak. Does he have a concussion? Will he lose his memory? Will he turn into an idiot?" Cheto gradually appeared in the direction Huimao was facing. After shooting a glance at the man on the ground, he said calmly, "It's fine. Let's hurry and leave." It was Cheto who had urged Huimao to leave just now. This time, they were going to capture the leaders of the three forces and interrogate them. As the leader of the forces in this area, their defenses should be pretty good. At the very least, it was one of the better ones on this planet. However, it was really not enough for Silin and the others, not to mention Huimao and Cheto who were more familiar with these things. Cheto walked over and picked up the unconscious man on the ground like he was picking up a chicken. Then he left. No one inside the building knew that their boss had been knocked unconscious and taken away. Chapter 413. When Romulos woke up, he realized that he was sitting on a chair. His hands and feet were trapped, and there were two people sitting on either side of him. Romulos was all too familiar with these two people. They had been fighting against each other since a long time ago, and as the leaders of the three great forces in the pharmaceutical factory area, they were trapped here as well. The three of them looked at each other speechlessly. However, they couldn't afford to offend someone who could easily capture them and bring them here. The less they spoke, the less mistakes they would make. They might as well save their energy to think about how to deal with what was going to happen next. The three of them knew each other very well. and it was obvious that they couldn't talk to each other just by looking at their expressions. Romulos looked at his surroundings. This place looked like a small room that was about 10 square meters in size. The decorations were simple, but not shabby. It was obvious that these were all high-tech products. Romulos's head still hurt a little. He remembered seeing that strange cat before he fainted. Whoosh! The door opened, and the people who walked in were all wearing protective suits. Their faces couldn't be seen, but their voices sounded very young, and their auras were very strong. Unlike the other two, Romulos's attention was focused on that Huimao. Right now, the fat cat was sitting on a person's shoulder and licking its paws. It looked very harmless. "Yo, you guys woke up pretty fast," Lung said while looking at them. He was holding a syringe as thick as an arm and said regretfully, "I was going to give you a shot if you guys didn't wake up." The faces of the three middle-aged men twitched. Wouldn't that syringe really kill someone? It looked like it was impossible to fake unconsciousness. They had come prepared. "What do you want to know?" one of the leaders of the forces asked. Silan and the others pulled over chairs and sat down. Ci Jincheng was responsible for dealing with them, and Silan was writing and drawing on the electronic tablet in his hand. Lung and Knight looked at it, but they didn't understand it, so they stopped looking. A few questions. First, did anyone from another planet come over in the past 2 days? Ci Jincheng asked. Yes, but they were taken care of. The man answered. Dealing with them meant killing them. According to the answers of these three people, Silan and the others learned that although this planet was not far from the transit planet, and was not safe enough, there were still people who came here. It was just that as soon as they arrived, they were robbed and killed by the three factions in the area for their spaceships. What the three leaders lacked was aircrafts. Although they were reluctant to give up the territory they had conquered, having enough aircrafts was also a way of retreat and insurance. Since there were aircrafts coming their way, how could they not snatch them? Fortunately, the people who came from the transit planet were not infected, so they did not bring the virus with them. In addition, after learning about what happened on the transit planet, the three leaders became much more cautious. Every time there was an outsider, they would bring along some antivirus equipment. This planet had always been the world of pharmaceutical factories. Even if the three major pharmaceutical factories had collapsed, there were still plenty of drugs and disinfectants. No matter what, there had not been any cases of virus infection here, at least not until now. The three leaders did not know much about the biochemical beastmen. That was in another area. They only knew that something had happened there, and that biochemical beastmen had appeared. After learning of the biochemical beastmen's appearance, they built a defense line here, but they did not go over to help the people there. One reason was that they did not have a flying tool that could reach there quickly. Normal flying cars were too slow, a waste of time, and unreliable. The other reason was that they could barely take care of themselves here, and were too lazy to pay attention to the people in other areas. When Ci Jincheng mentioned the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory in this area, the three leaders fell silent. However, after Ci Jincheng took out the intercepted communication information and analyzed the situation for them, the three leaders finally reluctantly said something. There was a base below, and it was where the people from the pharmaceutical factory parked their transportation tools. When the people from the pharmaceutical factory left, they took away some of them, but not all of them. They felt that there must be more spaceships inside. The three leaders had spaceships on hand, but they were too small, and there were not many of them. They all wanted to get their hands on larger spaceships or transportation ships from the underground base. Transportation ships? Is the underground base that big? Pride sneered. I don't know exactly how big it is, but this underground base is definitely not small. Romulo said. Then what is that thing you're talking about? Or should I say, that monster? Ci Jincheng asked again. The expressions of the three leaders changed when they heard this term. They seemed to have thought of something terrifying. Seeing that the three of them did not want to answer, Knight rubbed his fists and looked like he was about to start torturing them. The leaders of the three forces were calm. Actually, it doesn't matter if we say it or not. There are some things that everyone knows, and we're not the only ones who know. Celine and the others stopped what they were doing and listened to the words of the three leaders of power. They were very interested in that thing as well. They wondered what it was that could make these three leaders wary. We don't know what it is either. Maybe it's a strange product of those people's research, or maybe it's something else. However, according to our elders, there's a devil inside that base. A devil? Huemao's ears straightened and his eyes shone. Celine flicked Huemao's ear and told him to behave. Your elders? How long has that thing existed? Celine noticed this. I'm not sure, probably more than 70 years. We've heard stories about the devil inside that base since we were very young. More than 70 years. That was a really long time. Isn't that someone or something inside the pharmaceutical factory? Xi Jincheng asked. The three shook their heads. It shouldn't be. I heard that people from the pharmaceutical factory have been there before. It's a huge warehouse, and there are transport planes and other flying tools there. However, many of them can't be flown anymore. All the electronic and mechanical equipment inside the warehouse can't be used, and there's no lighting. It's completely dark. Also, many people who went in said that there's a devil inside, a black devil. Some people tried to hunt it down, but the people from the pharmaceutical factory discovered that those people were dead the next day. All their bones were shattered, and it was a horrible sight to see. Didn't the people from the pharmaceutical factory think of cleaning it up? Knight asked. That warehouse's location is a little special, and it's not easy to make a move on it. If you're not careful, you'll destroy the workshop above the warehouse, and it'll be a huge loss. That's why the higher-ups of the pharmaceutical factory directly sealed the warehouse. After that warehouse was sealed, nothing strange happened in the pharmaceutical factory. Not long ago, before the collapse of the pharmaceutical factory, those people tried to open that warehouse, but none of them came out. Huemao's claws were starting to get restless again. He was very interested in those strange things. It was just like hide and seek, except that the identity of the target was unknown. The three leaders no longer hid the truth about that thing. Didn't they want to borrow Celine's hands to open the warehouse, defeat the devil inside, and then obtain those flying tools inside? Celine and the others understood this, but they didn't say anything. The three leaders didn't say anything like, tell us and you'll let us go either. They knew that since the people in front of them had the ability to capture the three of them, even if they let them go, they could capture them again if they wanted to. Therefore, this was not a situation where they could negotiate. Moreover, based on the three leaders' judgment, they believed that these young people's target was not them, and they wouldn't waste too much energy on them. Therefore, since these strangers wanted to know about the pharmaceutical factory, and wouldn't fight with them for the flying tools, why not tell them? After understanding the situation at the pharmaceutical factory, the three of them were knocked unconscious and sent back. Celine looked at the ruins below the aircraft. He knew that the answer in his heart was in that warehouse. Romulos, who had been sent back safely, woke up to find himself sitting on a chair in the office. Romulos, who had woken up, picked up the herbal tea on the table and took a few gulps. He panted, then called a few of his confidants. Stop all operations at the other places and send people to keep an eye on the situation around the pharmaceutical factory. But don't act recklessly without my orders. Report to me if anything happens, Romulos said in a low voice. Although his confidants were a little puzzled by Romulos's sudden change of plans, they didn't ask any more questions when they saw the look on Romulos's face. Other than Romulos, the other two leaders did the same thing. The originally chaotic civil war had stopped. Perhaps it was because of the three leaders' influence, but the people of the three forces felt a strange sense of nervousness and anticipation. The aircraft arrived at the ruins of the pharmaceutical factory in stealth mode. Huimao was still the first to go down and set up the detector. Because of Celine's reminder, Huimao didn't run around, although it really wanted to go to the warehouse and see what the devil inside looked like. The information about the pharmaceutical factory was quickly sent to the aircraft, and the layout of the underground base was displayed. This should be the warehouse they were talking about. Xi Jincheng pointed at an empty area on the map, because the detector that entered the pharmaceutical factory couldn't detect the situation there. Celine nodded. According to the signal, it was indeed in that direction. But other than these, there doesn't seem to be anything else. As for these, Ci Jincheng pointed at the dim dots on the distribution map. Their life signals aren't strong, so they shouldn't be anything difficult to get. However, although there aren't many living things inside, the underground base is filled with poisonous gas. We have to be careful. There are a lot of chemicals inside. Everyone bring some neutralizing spray just in case. Sillin and the others landed on the ruins together. Huimao had already dug a hole out of boredom. The hole led to the underground base. Knight and the others who had seen Huimao dig before were fine with it. Ci Jincheng and the others looked at the hole, then at Sillin before jumping down one after another. What Ci Jincheng and the others meant was, "This cat you're raising sure has many uses." The underground base was filled with all kinds of poisonous gas, and they had to be careful not to touch those bottles and cans when they walked. There was no telling what kind of medicine those bottles and cans contained. They couldn't look at the packaging of these medicines, because the contents inside were different from what was shown on the packaging. The underground base was filled with poisonous gas, so they couldn't see their way at all even if they turned on the lights. However, the visual windows on the protective masks could solve this problem. Through the fog, they could see the underground base clearly even in the dark. Ci Jincheng took a look at the storage devices on some of the instruments. They were more seriously corroded, so how much they could be repaired would depend on luck. A colorful little snake was crawling at the corner of the laboratory table. Creatures that could endure this kind of environment and survive were all very lethal. They couldn't just look at its size. The little snake charged towards Pride, who was the closest to it. Pride's movements weren't slow either. He raised his hand and slashed downwards with his blade, directly cutting the snake in half. However, when the half-snake's body rolled to the side, the blood that flowed out was mixed with certain components in the air, making it even more corrosive. The result of the increased corrosion was that it corroded a reagent bottle there, and the liquid inside flowed out. Run! Sillin realized that something was wrong after he heard the rustling sound of corrosion. The moment he shouted, everyone fled swiftly as well. In the next moment, the place where the half-snake's body was exploded with a bang. Although the scale of the explosion wasn't large, it caused quite a few consecutive explosions. There were more reagent bottles there, and the chain effect caused by one explosion took a long time to die down. Holy shit, this place really isn't fit for humans. I'd rather go deal with those biochemical beasts. Knight patted off the various debris that had fallen on his body. Pride also felt a wave of lingering fear. He didn't think that just half a snake's body could cause so many chain effects. This wasn't Pride's fault. This would have happened to anyone else. In this underground base that was filled with all kinds of gases, any change could cause an accident. This won't do. Sillin took out a neutralization spray and tried spraying a bit of it at the surroundings. The colored or transparent gases were all absorbed by the neutralization spray and turned into powder that fell to the ground. This kind of powder was much more stable than the poisonous gases floating in the air. Let's spray some neutralization spray first. It'll save us some trouble later on, Sillin said. The group sprayed the neutralization spray as they walked, and it did make the journey a lot easier. However, they had learned from the mistakes of the animals that would appear from time to time, so they were extra careful. Compared to the rest of the group, Cheto and Huimao were still a bit different in this line of work. They didn't wear protective suits or use breathing aids, and they didn't feel any discomfort even in such an environment. When they arrived at the core laboratories of the underground base, the rest of the group began to help Ci Jincheng repair the information here. Sillin looked around and said, "I'm going to take a look at the warehouse." "I'll go with you." Knight put down the instrument in his hand and said. Lung was about to follow as well, but Sillin waved his hand and said, "It's fine. Cheto and Wheeze will be fine. There are some questions I want to find the answers to." Hearing Sillin's words, Lung and Knight no longer insisted. They pointed at their communicators and said, "Contact me if you need anything. Also, tell us about the devil's true appearance." "All right." Sillin made a reassuring gesture and led Cheto and Huimao towards the warehouse. "Just the three of them? Are you sure you'll be fine?" Pride asked. He thought that this place was dangerous enough to begin with, and with that devil added to the mix, could Sillin, Cheto, and Wheeze really handle it? Don't worry, Silin knows what he's doing. Ci Jincheng looked up and said, also don't underestimate him. There's still Cheto and that cat. They're all ruthless characters. Pride recalled Cheto and Hui Mao's performance during this period of time. Although he didn't show it on the surface, he admired them on the inside. He was also glad that they were on the same side right now, and not on the opposite side. But Silin really was a mystery. Silin was heading towards the warehouse. He didn't need to use the distribution map at all. He could track down the signal himself. Are you sure you can't sense the signal? Silin asked again. No. Cheto and Hui Mao shook their heads at the same time. If they still couldn't sense it, then Silin was sure that the thing was coming for him. The closer they got to the warehouse, the stronger and more urgent the signal became. What is it, Silin? Hui Mao jumped onto Silin's shoulder. He was dissatisfied that he couldn't sense the signal that Silin could sense. However, Cheto didn't sense it either. This made Hui Mao feel a lot better. I can't tell what it is exactly. It's like a greeting from someone I haven't seen for a long time. There's nothing too specific to say. Both Hui Mao and Cheto didn't quite understand Silin's explanation. While they were puzzled, Silin arrived in front of the warehouse. The warehouse door was tightly shut, and it looked like it had been closed for a long time. However, the marks on the ground proved that it had been opened recently, and confirmed the three forces' words. Since they approached the warehouse, the lighting inside the base had gone out of control. They could feel the gloomy feeling coming from inside even before the door was opened. The warehouse door opened on its own before they could crack the password. The air inside was several degrees colder than outside, and it carried a trace of the smell of blood. Silin looked around and saw that there were some transport planes and a couple of not-so-big transport ships inside the warehouse. These transport planes and ships looked like they had been here for a long time. The three forces said that they had been here for more than 70 years, and Silin thought so too. The silence of the machinery was very strong. Walking inside, Silin saw a couple of corpses lying on the ground. They were probably killed when the warehouse was opened not long ago. Their faces were still filled with fear, but their bodies were sunken in, and their bones were all broken. There were no external injuries on their bodies, and the blood was flowing out of their nostrils and mouths. The warehouse was so quiet that even Hui Mao's tapping of his ears could be heard clearly. Silin walked past the corpses and continued forward. A couple of steps later, Silin looked up at the top of the warehouse. There was a person standing upside down against the top of the warehouse. He was completely silent. A man wearing a cloak. No, it wasn't a cloak, it was wings. The man had wrapped the wings around his body, so it looked like he was wearing a bamboo hat. Chapter 414. The warehouse was still dark, but Silin was able to see the man clearly with the help of the protective mask and his special eyesight. If the man didn't speak, his presence would be very low. He had no killing intent, his breathing was almost inaudible, and his heartbeat was almost undetectable. There was no telling what he was going to do next. The dead people on the ground had obviously seen him before they died, or they wouldn't have looked so terrified otherwise. Who are you? Silin asked. The person stuck to the roof of the warehouse did not answer Silin. After a brief moment of silence, the feet that were stuck to the roof moved, and his entire body fell downwards. When he fell, he had already turned upside down and landed soundlessly on the ground. The man didn't spread his wings during the whole process. He felt light as a feather, but his speed wasn't slow at all. It was obvious that he was very familiar with the process. The man landed 10 meters away from Silin, and he still looked like he was wearing a cloak. His height of more than 2 meters and his special cloak made him look very oppressive in this environment. He looked at Silin, Hui Mao and Cheto. He seemed to be very curious about them. His face was expressionless, and his gray eyes were completely emotionless. However, Silin felt that he was actually excited and curious. He just didn't show it. Another strange silence ensued. Just as Hui Mao couldn't stand the silence any longer, and was about to speak, the man moved. He opened the wings around him and retracted them to his back. His arms hung naturally at his sides, and his body was covered in a coat that looked like fur. He wasn't stepping on anything either. The first impression he gave off was, how black. His entire body was black, and his gray eyes looked even colder and more merciless than before. Of course, that was just how it looked. He didn't say anything, but Sillin could sense that the man's doubt seemed to have grown stronger. Sillin motioned Cheto and Huimao to move to the side and make space for the man. Cheto dragged the reluctant Huimao to the side and stood next to a transport plane. The man moved in the next moment. In a flash, he appeared in front of Sillin in the next moment, and the wings on his back flapped diagonally. Sillin did not dodge. He raised his hand to block the slap. Bang! It was like the sound of two hard metals colliding. As soon as the flap fell, the figure appeared behind Sillin again. It flapped its wings again, then to the left front, left back. With each strike he changed his position and moved faster and faster. At first, it was still possible to see the figure after each strike, but gradually, only a black shadow could be seen flashing around Sillin. It was the flapping of wings, and the person himself was moving at such a high speed that it was difficult to see and gradually faded away. Bang! Bang! The sounds continued. Sillin did not move his feet. From beginning to end, he stood in his original position. However, the arms that blocked the wing attacks seemed to have disappeared with the increasing speed of the attacks. Ordinary people would not be able to see it with their eyes. Half a minute later, the man stopped attacking and returned to a spot 10 meters away from Sillin. He stood still just like before. There was no panting, no panic. In fact, his aura was exactly the same as before. Mengqi arrow, the man said. This was the first thing the man said after he was done testing Sillin. His voice was a little deep, and it sounded a little dry and hoarse. Maybe it was because he hadn't spoken for a long time. Squatting impatiently on the spaceplane, Huimao looked puzzled by the man's words. Mengqi arrow, in the ancient language it means holy light, Sillin said. He was explaining for Mengqi arrow, and also for Huimao and Cheto. Sillin. Sillin pointed at himself, Huimao and Cheto. Wheeze Cheto. Wheeze. It's Wheeze. Huimao corrected him from the side. Wheeze is his nickname. Mengqi arrow looked at Huimao and seemed to be thinking about his nickname. Who are you? Sillin asked again. Did you send that signal? Hearing Sillin's question, Mengqi arrow looked at Sillin again and said, yes. Then there was silence. Sillin. It looks like this man really doesn't talk much. Why did he send that signal? Why couldn't anyone else sense or detect it? Sillin asked. Mengqi arrow had no intention of hiding it. Because they don't have that chip. Sillin's eyelids twitched. It's the chip. Is it Howley Hansen's chip? Yes. Were you forced to inject it as well? Yes. Huimao's beard shook again and again. It's so tiring to talk to this man. He's exactly the kind of guy who can't do anything but looks very serious. Fortunately, Mengqi arrow answered him. But it was just a question and an answer. It was tiring just listening at the side. Do you have any information about Howley Hansen? Sillin asked. Mengqi arrow nodded and raised his hand. A projector on a transport plane projected the information. The information was very detailed and complete. From this information, Sillin learned Mengqi arrow's origin. At the beginning, Mengqi arrow wasn't called Mengqi arrow. At the time, he was a biochemical beastman experiment subject, and had only one experiment number. Howley Hansen was a member of Miracle. Sillin had thought of this when he saw Mengqi arrow. Seeing this information about Howley Hansen, Sillin suddenly remembered a lot of things from the past, such as the situation when he was injected with the chip and escaped from the underground secret room. Some of the doubts buried in his heart were also answered. Howley Hansen was an employee of the pharmaceutical factory and a member of the underground research base of Miracle. However, as an employee of Miracle, Howley Hansen wasn't satisfied with this. He had an idea in his heart, and that was to carry out his own research. However, with Howley Hansen's position in the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory, he couldn't have his own research project. He could only be an assistant and had to do whatever was ordered. Howley Hansen, who wasn't satisfied with the status quo, had always wanted to appear in Glory and Code, the two electronic publications known as the history books of the League of Stars. Just like the influence of these two electronic publications in the League of Stars, Hallie Hansen also wanted to become a person admired by tens of thousands of people, and wanted that kind of honor. However, Miracle didn't give him this opportunity. At the time, the person in charge of the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory was very disdainful of Hallie Hansen's idea and even mocked him. Not long after, Hallie Hansen quietly carried out his research, and the experimental subjects that the research institute needed were the biochemical beastman experiment subjects. However, the failure rate of the experiment was too high, and he stole many experimental subjects without the consent of the person in charge. In the end, he was discovered. Hallie Hansen fled from the pharmaceutical factory where the biochemical beastman laboratory was located, and created a mess. While everyone was busy paying attention to the workshop, Hallie Hansen stole a small aircraft from this warehouse. He couldn't steal a large aircraft, and it was difficult to pilot it, so in the end he could only pilot a small aircraft. Because the capacity of the small aircraft was limited, Hallie Hansen threw down some things that he didn't think were important, including Monchi Arrow, who had just been injected with the chip, and was classified as a failed experimental subject. This was because when Hallie Hansen arrived at this warehouse, his heart stopped beating. When Hallie Hansen piloted the aircraft and left, before the people of this underground warehouse came to check, Monchi Arrow woke up. At that time, his chip had been stimulated by more than 90%, which was something that Hallie Hansen had never expected. After that, Monchi Arrow lived in this dark warehouse. Because this underground warehouse was only a backup warehouse, there were other warehouses above ground for transporters and cargo spaceships, so there were very few people coming here. Plus, with Monchi Arrow's ability to hide, he wasn't discovered. Later, when someone wanted to use the transporter in the underground warehouse, they found that it couldn't be used. At that time, Monchi Arrow was discovered, and those people shot at him, and the result can be imagined. None of those people survived. Later, when a group of people came to check, Monchi Arrow didn't come out and hid in a cargo spaceship. All the transporters and spaceships in this warehouse couldn't fly, because when the chip was stimulated, all the flying tools and operating systems here were destroyed, and the warehouse's monitoring equipment and other lighting equipment suffered the same result. When the people came to check again, they couldn't find the reason. At that time, several senior executives of the pharmaceutical factory were fighting for management rights, and this warehouse's problem was also explained by other reasons, which became the reason why those people fought and attacked each other. Later on, when the pharmaceutical factory's management changed, the flying tools in this warehouse were no longer used. Moreover, there were some important workshops above the warehouse, and the managers were afraid that they would be caught if something went wrong, so they suppressed it again and again. However, since then, the employees had been secretly spreading rumors that there was a devil in the underground warehouse. When the person in charge of Miracle discovered that Hallie Hansen had been secretly stealing experimental subjects to carry out his own experiments, and learned that a few excellent experimental subjects had been crippled, the person in charge was furious and had sent people to hunt him down. According to the information given by Monchi Arrow, Miracle had blown up Hallie Hansen's aircraft, and in Miracle's records, Hallie Hansen was a dead man. Sillin didn't know how Hallie had deceived the eyes of Miracle's people here, but he thought that Hallie Hansen must have packed his things and ran to Planet Brown Earth in Sector X, built an underground laboratory, and carried out his experiments carefully. He wasn't afraid of the people of Planet Brown Earth, but the people of Miracle. However, the people of Planet Brown Earth generally had low genes, and their physiques couldn't compare to those excellent experimental subjects, so their progress was slow. That was why Hallie had spent so many years experimenting, and it was only when Sillin appeared that the chip he was upgrading finally came into play. Hallie thought that the experimental subject, Monchi Arrow, was already dead, but he didn't expect that after he abandoned Monchi Arrow here, the experimental subject that was determined to be a failure would succeed after that. Moreover, he had been living in this warehouse all this time, and would only go out to hunt when he was hungry without being discovered. Hallie Hansen had escaped to that underground base on Planet Brown Earth for more than 70 years. 70 years. If he knew that he had succeeded more than 70 years ago, how would he feel? If Hallie Hansen had brought Monchi Arrow along with him on the spaceplane at that time, then Sillin definitely wouldn't have existed after that. Maybe Ole Hansen's name really could have appeared in Glory and Code 70 years ago. One had to admit that Ole Hansen was truly a capable person. Although it was different from what Sillin had thought at the beginning, that the chip was made here and brought over, and not made on planet Brown Earth, Sillin still admired Ole Hansen. It wasn't just because he made this chip and changed Sillin's life, there were other reasons as well. Ever since Sillin had escaped death, his heart had always been filled with doubts. But now, it seemed that Ole Hansen still had a trick up his sleeve. Sillin admitted that he had lost to Ole Hansen. He clearly remembered that in that underground secret room, after he killed Ole Hansen, the electronic synthesized voice that sounded from the mechanical instrument said, "Master is dead. Beginning program purge." Why did the purge program need to prompt him? Moreover, every message that was about to be purged would flash on the screen. If he really didn't want to be discovered by others, setting up such a purge mode would be too much of a waste of time. Also, there was a 5-minute program purge, and the next 5 minutes were used to execute the program to destroy. The countdown to desertification. The doors in the underground secret room were all open, and there was no obstruction. The scene that seemed to have been deliberately arranged reappeared in Sillin's mind. The 5 minutes of calculation allowed Sillin to crawl out from the vent. Everything was within Ole Hansen's plan. Although Ole Hansen might not have thought that Sillin would be the one to escape after his success, Sillin couldn't help but admit that Ole Hansen had arranged everything very well. Moreover, he was crazy enough to even calculate the time of his own death. Why did he let the successful experiment come out? Maybe Ole Hansen didn't take in that message at the time, or maybe Sillin didn't see it. After all, time was too tight at the time, and Sillin didn't pay attention to the information of some other instruments. Or maybe the instrument wasn't placed on the test bench Sillin was lying on in the first place. In short, Sillin had missed that message. The projection in front of him displayed a star map, a detailed star map at that. The star map wasn't complete, and there were only a few sectors around sector, or that were lagging behind. However, the information on it was impossible to ignore. It was the distribution map of Miracle's other bases. More than 70 years ago, or perhaps even earlier, Ole Hansen had drawn out the distribution map of those hidden research bases. At the time, Miracle was still that powerful corporation with a powerful backer. Sillin raised his hand and unfolded the star map. He found the planet's location and the pharmaceutical factory that was marked on the map. Below it was Miracle's research base. This and the other pharmaceutical factory could only be said to be in a cooperative relationship with Miracle. They didn't belong to Miracle. Cheto had already copied all the information while Sillin was flipping through the information, so there was no need for Sillin to copy it again. Ole Hansen wanted revenge, and these were some of the distribution maps of Miracle that he knew of. Those people had stopped him from appearing on the 2 top magazines and obtaining glory, so Ole Hansen bore a grudge against them. His successful experiment was the sharpest weapon for revenge, and it was also the proof that he, Ole Hansen, was in no way inferior to some of the people in charge of Miracle. Sillin was one of them, and Minji Arrow. Looking at the person in front of him, Sillin didn't know what kind of attitude he should use to face him. Monkey Arrow didn't have any malicious intentions towards Sillin. Perhaps they were like brothers, and the chip that had fused with their genes was like their blood relation. In the eyes of the researchers, this was just a relationship between 2 experimental subjects. However, this chip was too special. Just like a blood connection, Sillin could sense Minji Arrow's existence even before he actually entered the planet. This was the connection between the chip. In the entire League of Stars, and even in this vast universe, Sillin and Minji Arrow were the only ones who shared such a special blood connection. Minji Arrow had been staring at Sillin all this time, as if he was waiting for Sillin to make a decision. Minji Arrow, holy light in the ancient language, was the race of the happy people who lived under the light in the myth of creation. Minji Arrow looked very serious and cold, but this name revealed his thoughts. Perhaps, when he was an experimental subject in an underground experimental base, he was just a person with nothing but a serial number. Minji Arrow didn't understand this world. What was life, what was ideal, and what was a dream? However, later, He stayed alone in this warehouse and released some of the information and images of the outside world that he had stolen while hunting through the projectors on the transport planes in the warehouse. He stood upside down on the roof of the warehouse and looked at the residents outside. He looked at the life under the sun, and gradually understood the world outside the warehouse and the people outside. He knew that he was different from the others. Whether it was the people outside or the biochemical orcs in another pharmaceutical factory on a planet far away from here. He knew that no one on the entire planet could receive the signal he had released from the AI chip. It was like you were in a crowd and you were greeting people in a friendly way. But no one could understand you and no one responded. Disappointment had become a habit. He always went out at night because he knew that his existence was unusual. That was why he deliberately avoided daytime. Monk Aluo remembered that he once saved a girl when he went out. When he rescued the girl from the hands of those evil forces, he was stabbed by the girl. She was a beautiful girl, but Monkiero remembered the fear, alienation, and strong rejection in the girl's eyes when she looked at him. It was as if she was looking at an alien, a devil that people talked about. What did it feel like to be stabbed by a knife? Monkiero couldn't remember clearly, but it seemed to hurt a lot. He didn't know where it hurt. He couldn't integrate into this society, so he could only stay alone in this dark warehouse and look at the bright world outside through the projector day after day. Until one day he released the signal that came from the chip as usual. It was like a habit that supported his life and proved his existence. It was something he had to do every day. The signal was received. Monkiero was waiting for him. He knew that the enemy would come. Sillin looked at Monkiero before turning around and walking toward the warehouse entrance. Huimao shot Monkiero a glance before following him to the door with Cheto. Monkiero didn't move, speak, or change an expression as he watched the trio walk out of the warehouse. However, when Sillin stopped at the warehouse entrance and yelled at Monkiero, "Follow me," Huimao saw light return to Mengiero's gray eyes. Chapter 4:15. Maybe it was because he had been isolated for too long, and the things he had experienced over the years, Monkiero didn't like to speak, and he had trouble communicating with other people. Just like before, he answered every question, and didn't want to say anything more than that. In fact, he wasn't even willing to express what he wanted or what he wanted. It wasn't convenient for Sillin to ask about the chip right now. He would talk to Monkiero after everything was over. This was their secret and it couldn't be leaked. Otherwise, it would cause another conflict. Sillin left the warehouse and walked toward Ci Jincheng and the others. The passage along the way was still surrounded by all kinds of poisonous gas, but Monkiero wasn't wearing a protective suit. Just like Cheto, he was walking calmly inside. Huimao looked at Monkiero, and then at Sillin. He knew that Sillin and Monkiero were very similar. If Monkiero could resist the poisonous gas, then Sillin should be able to as well. So why was Sillin wearing such a thick protective suit? I don't understand. Flicking his ears, Huimao stopped thinking about it and crouched on Sillin's shoulder. He looked at Monkiero who was following behind him. He began to think about something. If Monkiero was trustworthy, then there were 4 of them including himself, Sillin, and Cheto. No matter what, they wouldn't lose to Sigma and his brothers. In Huimao's opinion, the 4 of them were similar. 2 of them had chips, 1 was a cyborg, and the last was a robot. All of them could communicate using the machine language. Wait, does this black idiot who just joined us know the machine language or not? Huimao looked at Monkiero and asked him a few questions using the machine language. But Monkiero simply looked at Huimao and didn't answer. Do you understand the machine language? Left with no choice, Huimao asked in the League of Stars language. I don't understand. Menga Luo was still expressionless. That won't do. Huimao was wondering when he should teach Sillin the mechanical language. It wasn't every day that Huimao found someone with a mechanical structure similar to Sillin's, and he didn't want to give up. Otherwise, he would be at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Along the way, Huimao chatted with Monkiero. Sillin allowed them to do as they pleased. This was beneficial to Monkiero. If he were to join the 11th squad in the future, he would need to interact with others. Nonsense was the first line of communication, and Huimao's nonsense was especially useful at times like this. Ci Jincheng's side was almost done. All he needed to do was to wait for Sillin to arrive before retreating. When they saw the person following behind Sillin, Ci Jincheng and the others were a little shocked. This was because this person was nowhere to be found on the life signature display of the detector. There were no dots of light at all. It looked like a biochemical orc, but the detector did not have any indication of a biochemical orc. Moreover, this person wasn't wearing any protective clothing. It looked like he wasn't affected by the poisonous gas. However, since Sillin had brought him here, he wasn't an enemy. Ci Jincheng and the others didn't raise their guns or make any threatening gestures. This made Mingji Arrow relax a little. Sillin, the person behind you is. Lung gestured for Sillin to introduce him. The person inside the warehouse used to be a biochemical orc experiment. He escaped and lived in the warehouse. Sillin gave a brief introduction of Mingji Arrow's situation. There were a lot of things he left out, and the chip and Howley Hansen were secrets that couldn't be told to anyone. Ci Jincheng and the others didn't pursue the matter. They only needed to make sure that Mingji Arrow wouldn't be a threat to them, and wouldn't bring them any trouble. Under such circumstances, they were happy to receive a helping hand. Sillin asked Cheto to take out the map of miracles surrounding star zones. There would definitely be a base related to the nightmare taper on it. The cleanup activities at the trade zone and the upper 3 star zones were progressing rapidly, and a lot of bases had been eliminated. Relatively speaking, it was much more likely that Miracle's people had moved to the lagging star zones. Even the military couldn't carry out a cleanup operation in one go in the lagging star zones. The environment in the star zones was generally not good, and it provided some people with a natural protective barrier. It's too much time consuming to look for them one by one. Ci Jincheng frowned. Based on the current situation, the infected area in the League of Stars was even bigger. Although there was progress in developing a vaccine, there was still no cure for the root cause. They could only try their best to prevent the infected's condition from worsening. Are the project teams making no progress? Sillin asked. Those project teams were all authoritative people in the relevant fields. If they had no progress until now, then the situation wasn't ideal. Ci Jincheng shook his head. Sillin thinks for a moment and looked at Mingji Arrow. Do you know anything about the nightmare taper? I don't. Then do you know where the people from the pharmaceutical factory went? Sillin asked from another angle. I know part of it. Tell us, we need some reference. Mingji Arrow pointed at the projected map and explained some of the information he knew in simple words. Although he didn't say much, it was all on point and gave Sillin and the others a lot of reference. So the upper echelons should be going to these 2 places. Sillin summarized the information Mingji Arrow told him and circled 2 planets. Those were the 2 planets that the managers of the biochemical orc base went to the most. As for the others, they were scattered all over the place. Most of them were within these marked areas. It seemed like Mingji Arrow had spent some effort to understand the marked map that Ho Lei left behind. It was just that Mingji Arrow was a loner, and was unwilling to go out. No matter what, let's go check out these 2 places first. It'll be more information if we can find the Nightmare Taper's base. Even if we can't find the Nightmare Taper itself, it'll be good if we know something about the virus it carries. At least we can make a vaccine as soon as possible to reduce the deaths. Ci Jincheng put the map away and looked at the others. Let's do it in a roundabout way. Even if we can't find the Nightmare Taper, it'll be worth it to find more information about the viruses. Knight patted the dust off his protective suit and said. The rest and Knight had the same thought. Mingji Arrow still had no expression on his face, but Sillin could sense that this guy was confused and a little nervous. After all, it was his first time coming into contact with so many people at such a close distance. Unlike those who would shoot or scream when they saw him in the past, Mingji Arrow was extraordinarily sensitive to kindness and malice after living for so many years. However, he did not see any disgust or alienation from these people. He was just curious at most. His tense body relaxed a little as well. When they were leaving the underground base, Long looked at Mingji Arrow and asked, Hey brother, are you a biochemical orc? Mingji Arrow paused and nodded. The term biochemical orc was filled with the aura of a different race. However, Long did not look down on them when he said the term biochemical orc. We killed many biochemical orcs just now. They ran out of the base, Long said. Mingiero was silent, while the others seemed to be walking seriously, but they were actually listening with their ears perked up. Mingiero spoke. I killed many too. Long stared at Mingiero and nodded. You're different from those biochemical orcs. Of course, he's my follower. Huimao said immediately. Kong Man was already waiting for them with the spaceplane when they got out of the underground base. Mingiero hopped onto the boarding board after Silin signaled him to do so. After entering the spaceplane, everyone sat down and rested. Ci Jincheng told Kong Man about their next target planet, and that they were in a hurry. What do we do with the things inside the warehouse? Knight gulped down some saliva and asked. Those people will probably go fight for them immediately, right? The spaceplane inside the warehouse only had some system issues, but it would take a lot of time to repair. This was also why the people in the pharmaceutical factory were unwilling to repair it in the past. They were unwilling to fork out either time or money. Let's leave it to the three forces to decide. I believe they'll be willing to pay the price, Silin said. When the situation on this planet happened, the three pharmaceutical factories had closed down one after another. All flying tools that could leave the planet were under the control of the people in the pharmaceutical factories, and all the spaceplanes that were not taken away had been disposed of except for that special warehouse. Those people have been loitering around the area lately, but they didn't notice us. Alan told Silin and the others about the people who had been monitoring the area around the pharmaceutical factories recently. If the three forces were going to fight for it, there would definitely be a large-scale battle later on. It was also possible that they would divide it up in the dark. No matter what the three forces decided, it was no longer important to Silin and the others. Lung and the others were loitering around Mingiero restlessly, trying to get close to him. Then, when they realized that Mingiero wasn't as fierce as he looked, they even studied Mingiero's wings out of curiosity. Huimao crouched on Silin's shoulder and looked in that direction. But the twitching of his tail from time to time told Silin that the guy was thinking of some kind of trick again. Finally, Huimao stood up and ran over with cat-like steps. Go away, go away. Huimao chased away the people who were studying Mingiero's wings. He paused in front of Mingiero and said as if he had made up his mind about something. Can you cross your arms? Like this. Huimao made a demonstration of crossing his arms. Mingiero didn't say anything, but he did as he was told. Raise your elbows a little more. Don't move your upper arms. Yes, just like this. After seeing that there was no problem, Huimao jumped on Mingiero's shoulder. When Mingiero turned his head to look at him, Huimao raised his forefoot and pushed Mingiero's head back, so that it wouldn't stare at him. Then he jumped on Mingiero's crossed arms and squatted down to try it. He felt uncomfortable, so he instructed Mingiero to adjust his arms. It looked like Huimao was being held in his arms. When he finally felt that it was okay, Huimao squatted on Mingiero's crossed arms and said, You can put the wings back. Mingiero did as he was told and formed a cloak again. Okay, don't bother me. I'm going to sleep. Silin and the others. Silin seemed to see a moving cat's nest, a human-shaped cat's nest that worked hard without complaint. During this process, Silin noticed that Mingiero seemed to be a little stiff, but it didn't reject it. Never mind, I'll let that cat be cocky for a while. Let it get closer to Mingiero and cultivate their friendship as teammates. Come here, Silin. Ci Jincheng waved at Silin while studying the information in his hand. Silin told Cheto to give the cat a beating if it got carried away. Otherwise, it would climb all over him. Cheto nodded. He would communicate with this new teammate of his. In terms of communication, Mingiero couldn't compare to a pure robot like Cheto. What's wrong? Silin walked over and sat down opposite Ci Jincheng. Ci Jincheng didn't say anything and passed Silin a new set of information. Silin took it and looked at it. He raised an eyebrow and said, It's starting to divide and reproduce? From this new information, Silin knew that the nightmare taper had begun to divide and reproduce. The nightmare taper multiplied by 2 divisions, just like a single cell. Also, they carried the same type of virus. It's not easy to find the nightmare taper this quickly, Sillin said. According to this information, the nightmare taper they captured now should be the first batch of division. A few authoritative research teams had begun to research this nightmare taper. They were divided into a few directions, such as suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation, and researching a virus vaccine. There didn't seem to be any progress in suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation. Right now, there was no way to completely suppress this creature's division. Even if there was, the method wasn't practical. As for vaccines, up until now, only 2 types of virus vaccines had been developed. Moreover, they were still in the experimental phase, so it was uncertain how effective they would be. Suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation doesn't seem possible at this stage. Xi Jincheng rubbed his forehead. But we can put more effort into the virus vaccine. The only thing we lack now is time. The virus is spreading too fast, and more planets are infected. Trade sector is especially bad. Sillin handed the documents back to Xi Jincheng and said, "We should be able to find information about those viruses when we look for Miracle's base this time." Xi Jincheng smiled tiredly. "I hope so." Sillin stopped talking. He really felt that he would find some important information soon. Moreover, there were hundreds of viruses in the nightmare taper's body. Most of them were difficult to deal with, including those man-made viruses. They couldn't be developed by a single research base, nor could they be developed overnight. Meanwhile, they did not find much information about the virus when they attacked Miracle's bases in the trade sector and the upper 3 sectors. In other words, the virus might have been developed in the research base in the other sectors. The results were then combined and implanted into the nightmare taper's body. There were a lot of lagging star zones, and they covered a lot of areas. The base distribution map Sillin obtained from Minji Arrow was only a part of it, but it would be enough to excite him if he could find some information about the virus. At this time, when the virus was wreaking havoc and people were panicking, feeling that they could not find a way out, the birth of every virus vaccine was a ray of hope. Their next target planet was also in Sector R. However, the planet's living environment was not good. There was an asteroid belt around it, and it was easy to cause an accident if someone with poor piloting skills came over. The planet was not big. According to the probe's report, it was a rank D habitable planet. There were no other large planets around it, and it was hidden in the asteroid belt. It was very difficult to be discovered. The ion storm just passed. Our luck is pretty good. Kong Man smiled. I really couldn't tell that Miracle's research base was here. Pride clicked his tongue. I wouldn't have noticed that there was a planet here if I didn't look closely. Lung looked at the star map in his hand, and the image displayed on the screen in front of him. There was no planet like this on Sector R's official star map. There was only this asteroid belt. If it was an adventurer or a hunter regiment, they would definitely take a detour after learning that there was an asteroid belt here. However, the star map in Lung's hand was not the official star map of Sector R. It was a detailed star map drawn by the Andryra family themselves. He didn't expect that they would also overlook the planet hidden in this asteroid belt. How capable, Knight concluded. There is no moisture or atmosphere detected on the planet's surface. Judging from these general survival indicators, it is undoubtedly a rank D habitable planet. Kong Man explained the planet's detection information to everyone. If the markings are correct, then Miracle's research base on this planet is at underground. Everyone's spirits rose. The more hidden it was, the more it proved the importance of this research base. The more important it was, the more likely they would be able to find a solution to the nightmare taper. Minji Arrow looked at the crowd. He didn't quite understand why they were suddenly happy, but Cheto had explained it to him. As for how much he would understand, well, he would take his time. Huimao was still sleeping soundly inside the cloak. He didn't show any intention of coming out even when he heard that there was a discovery outside. Kong Man drove the spaceplane into the asteroid belt and found a nearby place to hide the spaceplane. They didn't dare to drive the spaceplane directly because they would be discovered. The asteroid belt provided them with a hiding spot. The special magnetic field here, and the spaceplane's own concealment method made it very difficult to be discovered. Send 2 people to scout the path first and confirm if Miracle's base is there, Ci Jincheng said. I'll go with Cheto, Sillin said. Everyone looked at Minji Arrow's direction. The cat was not planning to come out. Count me in. It's safer with 3 people. Knight adjusted his protective suit. I'll go too. Let's split up and get ready, Lung also said. No, Sillin and the others will go first and observe the situation. If there really is a base here, then it must be a heavily guarded one. It's not good to have too many people. Ci Jincheng stopped Lung from following them. He didn't allow anyone to go with them either. Minji Arrow walked over and didn't say anything. But it looked like he wanted to go too? No need, the 3 of us are enough. Help me keep an eye on that cat, and don't let it cause trouble, Sillin said. Also, there's no protective suit that suits you here. You'll have to wait for a while if you want to go into space. Minji Arrow nodded in response to Sillin's words. Let's go. Sillin patted Cheto and Knight. After checking their protective suits, they left through the hatch. Chapter 416. After Sillin and the other 2 exited the cabin door, they flew towards that planet in stealth mode. Although they couldn't fly very fast with the thrusters on their protective suits, it was still more stealthy than the others. Pride and 3 others followed closely behind Sillin, and the other 2. However, they wouldn't step onto that planet like Sillin. Pride and the other 2 would hide somewhere closer to the planet, so that they could cover Sillin and the other 2 in time if something unexpected happened. There wasn't anything very special on the surface of the planet. It was about the same as many rank D habitable planets. However, after Sillin had installed the scanner, the scanned image showed the situation beneath the ground. He had already confirmed the fact that a base existed on this planet. He didn't know what was installed inside the base to shield it from external detection, but the scanned image only revealed a rough outline of the base. As for the detailed structure map inside, they weren't able to obtain it at all. The scanner that Sillin had installed was given to him by Ci Jincheng. This was also a device that the military had just developed not too long ago. Otherwise, they might not even be able to detect the outline of the underground base. No matter what, we've confirmed that a base does exist here. It's so well hidden that it's obvious how important this base is to Miracle. Ci Jincheng was very excited as he looked at the scanned image on the screen. They had confirmed the base, but how to get in was another problem. According to the markings on the scanned image, this base had almost 10 exits on the surface. Some were big, some were small. Right now, all of these exits were closed. It's sealed up so well. Aren't those people bored inside? Lung asked as he looked at the planet displayed on the screen. As long as the internal stability is properly adjusted and an excellent life support system is in place, we can build an underground world, Ci Jincheng said. However, the amount of manpower and financial resources needed to build an underground world like this is rather great. With Miracle's abilities in the past, this isn't a difficult task. Lung was well aware of the financial power of Miracle Corporation in the past. Back then, Miracle had too powerful a backer, and they had many supporters. The underground research they conducted was also able to rake in a large amount of money. Many of the rare minerals and materials were purchased by Miracle. On the planet, Sillin stretched out a finger and marked a few places on the map scanned by the scanner. They were the places where the entrances and exits were located. It looks like they're very vigilant, and they've made up their mind this time. These passageways are all sealed, and the slightest movement in the passageways will set off the alarm. If we go in, there'll probably be a group of people pointing guns at us before we even reach the base below. Ci Jincheng and the rest understood what Sillin was saying. Knight was a little annoyed. He had seen the death toll and the death rate caused by the nightmare taper earlier. Now that he had finally found a problematic base, it was difficult for him to do anything about it. The people from Miracle were too cunning. They did not plan to come out for the time being. They ate, drank, and defecated underground. All the entrances were sealed. Opening them by force was not a good idea. What should we do? The people in the spaceplane could not make up their minds at the moment. They could fight and kill, but there was really nothing they could do about these things. Even the equipment that Ci Jincheng took out now could not do anything about it, much less them. Sillin looked at the passageways on the map and said nothing. This time, there was nothing Huimao could do even if he showed up. This was because these passageways could not be touched. They could only come up with a good idea if they knew everything about the underground base. Let's try to hack into the network inside first, suggested Sillin. No, it's fine over there, but I'm too far away. The magnetic field around here affects me more. Also, the next ion storm is coming soon. Although the level of this storm is not considered high, it's more than enough to block communication and network signals. Cai Jincheng couldn't do anything about this either. He believed that this was the reason why Miracle had built this base here. The frequent particle storms had caused many people who came to this area to retreat. No one was willing to stay here for long, so this planet could continue to exist in seclusion for a long time. Sillin frowned. When is the next particle storm? Estimated half an hour later, 34 minutes 17 to 19 seconds. Cai Jincheng explained the estimation to Sillin. Also, I suggest that you all come back first and wait until this wave is over. In reality, everyone knew that even if they avoided this particle storm, who knew when the next wave would come? What if there were signs of the next wave after this one was over? Should they continue to wait? I'll go. A voice rang inside Sillin's communicator. This wasn't the voice of anyone in the Taper Extermination Squad. However, Sillin was very familiar with the owner of this voice. The moment the voice rang, Sillin immediately knew where this person usually hid. The White Spirit? The White Spirit had been hiding at Cheto's place all this time. As long as she was unwilling to come out, and Cheto intentionally hid her, it was very difficult to be discovered. The White Spirit had been very quiet after hiding at Cheto's place. She was only using Cheto to understand this world. Sillin knew that Cheto often brought the White Spirit with him when he was in the squad, but he didn't think that the White Spirit would come with him this time. But why didn't you and the others mention this when he called them? Why did they know that the White Spirit had escaped with Cheto? This is my own decision. I asked Cheto to keep it a secret, and I promised to keep it a secret. I didn't tell you and the others about it, the White Spirit explained. She just wanted to see this world. Although she was created by the Shi family's generation just like you and the others, she wasn't very close to them. In fact, her relationship with them couldn't be compared to the relationship between the 5 brothers. Cheto was the only person in the 11th squad who was close to her. How confident are you that you'll be able to get in? Sillin asked. It's impossible to sneak into the underground base's network completely noiselessly. This base's defense network is very strong. But like you said just now, the next particle storm is coming very soon. But you just said that the next particle storm is coming soon. If we can make good use of this particle storm, it'll be a pretty good idea, the White Spirit said. Although the White Spirit had joined the 11th squad, she rarely interacted with the rest of the squad. She thought that you and the others were very far away from her, but she was very happy that the 11th squad had Cheto. Cheto had taught her a lot of things and helped her understand the world better. Every time she came into contact with the other side of the world, she felt that she wasn't just a living program anymore. She was able to understand human emotions more closely. The reason she stepped forward wasn't for the 11th squad or the Taper Vanquisher squad. It was for Cheto. No one but Cheto was privy to the conversation between the White Spirit and Sillin. After circling in place for a while, Knight noticed that Sillin was standing there blankly for a long time. He asked, "Do you have any suggestions, Sillin?" Sillin nodded. Yes. This time it was Knight's turn to be stunned. He was just asking casually, and he was already planning to return to the spaceplane and avoid the particle storm first. He didn't expect Sillin to give him such a reply. Go back to the spaceplane with them first. Cheto and I will stay here. Why? You want to hack into the underground network? You can't. Even you will be greatly affected by the particle storm. All communication networks will malfunction for a short period of time. And how are you going to hack them if they're all intermittent? Also, Knight pointed at the protective suit on Sillin's body. This thing won't be able to protect you completely. Although the level of the particle storm that's about to hit you isn't that high, you may not be able to withstand the particle storm at its peak even if you wear the protective suit. Do you want to die? Let's go back to the spaceplane first. Knight tried to pull Silen's arm, but to no avail. It's fine. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing. Let's go back now. Knight grew anxious. There were still 18 minutes left, and they wouldn't have much time left if they dilly-dallied any longer. After all, it would take some time to get to the spaceplane from here. What's wrong? On the spaceplane, Xiai Jincheng asked after seeing that the duo hadn't moved yet. Knight told Xiai Jincheng about the situation. What do you think, Silen? Xiai Jincheng asked Silen. Don't worry, Cheto and I will hack in. This is an opportunity. After 2 seconds of consideration, Xiai Jincheng said, Come back first, Knight. No, we must drag this kid back. It's too dangerous to stay here. Before Knight could finish, he saw a layer of armor covering Silen and Cheto's bodies. Then the armor faded and they became invisible again. Knight struggled for a moment when he saw this. All right, how could I forget that you still have a life-saving trump card? 2 layers of protection. Thinking about the level of the particle storm, Knight felt that this should work, right? In any case, don't force yourself. Just take out your energy shield if you can't hold on anymore. It doesn't matter if those people discover you. Your life is more important. I know. You should go back now. Silen raised his foot and kicked Knight. After Knight left the planet and retreated to the spaceplane, Silen and Cheto arrived at a tightly closed passage. At first glance, it was impossible to tell that this was a passage. This place was so well integrated with the surroundings that it wasn't easy to be discovered. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Cheto still felt very guilty about bringing the white spirit out, so he didn't tell Silen about the white spirit. It's nothing, you all have your own freedom. Silen patted Cheto. Since you brought her with you, it means that you trust her. It's good that you have confidence in her. Also, we do need her help this time. By the time Knight, Pride and the others had returned to the spaceplane, the particle storm was slowly forming and moving towards them. Are Silen and the others really fine? Inside the spaceplane, everyone stared at the 2 dots on the screen. They really couldn't understand why they would attack when the particle storm was coming. How were they supposed to do it? It was hard to hack into the external network, wasn't it? Also, with such high energy particles and radiation, were those 2 really not affected by the storm? Cheto was one thing, everyone was numb to it and knew how special he was. But why was Silen staying there too? If he says he has a way, then he has a way. Let's watch. Therefore, everyone stared at the screen closely. Even Manchi Arrow was standing behind them and watching everything on the screen. Huimao poked his head out of the collar of his cloak and didn't go back to sleep. 12 seconds left. After that, we won't be able to contact you for a certain period of time. Be careful, Silen said to the white spirit. I know. I've experienced a lot of things like this in the past. The white spirit knew the particle storm very well. She was confident in herself. Get ready. Silen signaled Cheto. Cheto crouched down and placed his hand at the entrance of the sealed passage, trying to get as close to the center as possible. Go white. The moment before the particle storm reached this planet, the white spirit had already entered the sealed passage and snuck into the network inside the passage. She arrived inside the base in an instant. When the white spirit snuck into the network inside the passage, the underground base's alarm went off, but it wasn't very loud. The guards didn't pay attention to the faint alarm. After all, the sealed passage wasn't opened, and they attributed the alarm to the approaching particle storm. Due to the particle storm's influence, their internal communication was disrupted. The underground lighting system started flickering. A lot of instruments started going on strike, and the screens were starting to blur. However, the people in the base seemed to be used to this. They just minded their own business and paid no attention to the flickering screens and lighting system. They also didn't think that someone would hack into the base's network under such circumstances. Everyone in this place was very comfortable. Standing inside the spaceplane, Xiai Jincheng and the others were also strongly affected. They couldn't even contact Silen, and the image displayed on the screen wasn't clear either. It was flickering, and they could only vaguely see the entrance of the passage and the 2 blurry flashing signals that represented Silen and Cheto. Why do I feel like a white light flashed where Silen and Cheto were just now? Lung said in a low voice. I think I saw it too, Knight answered. The others had seen the same scene. Although it was only for an instant, everyone's attention was very focused at the time. Moreover, the monitors weren't affected at the time, so they could see everything clearly. It can't be an out-of-body experience, can it? A few people thought to themselves. The high-energy particle flow and radiation interference caused the communication and scanning system to operate abnormally, and the internal power supply to be disrupted for a short period of time. Fortunately, the particle storm didn't last long, and it left as quickly as it came. 5 minutes later, everything returned to normal. How are things on your side, Silin? Are you all right? Ci Jincheng asked hurriedly after everything had returned to normal. Everything is going smoothly, Silin answered. Following Silin's answer, the screen in front of Ci Jincheng and the others displayed a scene that delighted them. Is this the planet's underground base? Yes. Silin and Cheto were guarding the place, and they could also see the scene through the display on their masks. This was what they could see from the White Spirit's perspective. Everything in the underground base that had returned to normal was very calm. They didn't know that someone had entered. Chapter 417. The base hidden under the surface of the planet looked like a small town. It was divided into different areas, and the most important ones were the research area and the living area. Both the research area and the living area were very lively. From the White Spirit's point of view, the research area was pretty much the same as the other Miracles bases. They were already used to the forbidden research, so they didn't have much of a reaction when they saw them. Even if there was a newborn baby inside one of the liquid tanks that was kicking its little legs. Things like this had happened too many times. Anyone who came into contact with Miracle or investigated Miracle in depth would know something about it. Can we get the layout of the base? Silin asked. Not yet. The White Spirit moved through some of the equipment and the network. Sometimes it attached itself to the experimental equipment or electrical appliances of various sizes. Sometimes, it would sneak into the people's microcomputers to check, but it had not found the detailed layout of the entire base. Forget it. Let's take it one step at a time and stabilize the situation, Silin said. There were not many people in the base, but they seemed to be in good spirits. Sometimes, a few of them would sit together and chat while they ate, and the content of their conversation would be about what was happening in the League of Stars. These people did not have any taboos there, and they could talk about many things, such as the nightmare taper and the virus. It had to be said that those who could hide in this place had the right to speak in Miracle. Even if they could not compare to the higher-ups who had been captured by the 8 armies, the fact that they had such secret information proved their identity and status. Silin did not ask the White Spirit to look for the secret information that was secretly stored in some equipment. Instead, he asked her to listen to these people's conversation. Instead of looking for it blindly, it would be better to wait for a while and get a general idea from these people. Then they would look for it with the general idea. Everything the White Spirit had heard and seen in this place gave everyone enough information to shock them. Some of them were bragging when they were drunk. Some of them were chatting when they were having a private meeting, and some of them mentioned it when they were discussing research progress and facts. The base made them feel at ease, and they lowered their guard. There were always some people who were not as secretive as they thought they were. A person's willpower was actually much lower than they thought it was. As a result, Silin and the rest had a rough understanding of the Nightmare Taper's operation within 2 hours. In between there were 2 particle storms. Whenever this happened, these people would put down their work, chat, or engage in some lewd activities. But this was the time when they could learn the most information, and it was also the time when it was most convenient for the White Spirit to act. All the information on the devices was stolen at this time, and only then would the people in the base not suspect anything. According to what these people said, the Nightmare Taper was indeed activated after it was unsealed. Theoretically, it could carry thousands of types of viruses. That was the result of the Nightmare Taper's research. However, after Sifong's taper extermination operation, the Nightmare Taper, which had just been revived, was more or less restricted. According to the information received in the letter, The descendant nightmare taper that was captured in the infected zone carried 237 types of viruses. If it was really a new generation that had split, the mother nightmare taper would not have more than 1,000 types of viruses at most if they were to extrapolate upwards. The mother nightmare taper could only have one descendant every time it split. The descendant nightmare taper would be stored after each split, and wait for the next descendant to split from the mother. Only the descendant that split from the mother would have the best effect because each split would reduce the number of viruses. The viruses they carried might not be replicated completely. It was a random replication. Just like the second generation nightmare taper that split from the mother nightmare taper, the viruses they carried might not be the same. There might even be a huge difference in the number of viruses they carried. The more types of viruses they carried, the slower they split. Moreover, although the 6th, 7th, and 8th generation nightmare tapers split fast, their quality could not compare to the 2nd and 3rd generation nightmare tapers. To ensure that they had an excellent source of infection, Miracle's people had been waiting for the mother to split. They would only take revenge when they had enough excellent sources of infection. This was also the reason why they hadn't made a move even after so much time had passed. Even though they had been surrounded by various parties and had captured so many of their higher-ups. Unfortunately, this was not the base to study the nightmare taper. Moreover, these people had no idea where exactly the mother was. If they wanted to solve this crisis completely, they would have to find the mother in the end. Otherwise, the virus infection would last for a long time. Only the activated mother would have complete antibodies against the hundreds of viruses. The descendant did not have such antibodies, so the information that they could find from the descendant nightmare taper was limited. The main reason for the existence of this base was to develop some of the viruses. 86 types of man-made viruses were produced in this secret base. These viruses were then handed over to the people at the headquarters. Then, the people at the headquarters would implant the viruses produced by the other bases into the mother nightmare taper. What made everyone feel helpless was that the base had handed over the detailed information of the viruses when they handed over the 86 types of viruses. Meanwhile, the information and data regarding the 86 types of viruses on all the devices and equipment in this base had been wiped clean permanently. This was to prevent the internal personnel from leaking the information and causing all their efforts to go to waste. It was obvious how careful Miracle was when it came to this matter. We don't have the data of those viruses, but according to that big-bellied guy just now, there's still a vaccine here? Lung tapped his fingers. These people have been injected with the vaccine. They're not afraid of being infected by these 86 types of viruses. The vaccine should be real, but we don't know where the vaccine is hidden. Do you have any ideas, Silin? C.I. Jincheng asked. Silin was the one who infiltrated the base, so C.I. Jincheng had to ask Silin's opinion. Silin thinks for a moment and said, "We can definitely find it if we want to, but we'll have to plan how we should act after we find it." Indeed, no one could get in right now, and the emergency alarms would go off the moment there was a small crack in the sealed passageways. The problem now is how to get the vaccine. If we can move the vaccine to the passageway, we can act as soon as possible even if the alarm goes off, C.I. Jincheng said. Get the vaccine. Let me think about it. Silin contacted the White Spirit after he finished talking to C.I. Jincheng. Can you control the housekeeping robots in the base? Silin asked. Actually, the White Spirit had already found the place where the vaccine was stored. What they needed to do now was to come up with a plan of action. Yes, they're not hard to control. However, if I control a housekeeping robot, I won't be able to pay attention to anything else. The White Spirit answered. You don't have to pay attention to anything else. The next small-scale particle storm will arrive in 25 minutes, and it will last for around 10 minutes. It'll be best for us to act then, but we need to hurry. Are you confident? 10 minutes won't be easy. The place where the vaccine is stored is a little troublesome, and the closest exit will take us 5 minutes. The housekeeping robots have a speed limit here, and they can't go faster than a certain speed. If we go too fast, we'll attract their attention. How long will it take? Based on the speed of the housekeeping robots and the factor of deciphering the door of the warehouse where the vaccine is stored, how long do you think it'll take? The White Spirit thought for a moment. A conservative estimate of 15 minutes. If we run into other things, it'll probably take a little longer. Sillin nodded. He believed in the White Spirit's estimate. In that case, they had to wait for an opportunity. Once he thought about it, Sillin discussed it with Cai Jincheng and the others. Everyone agreed to wait for an opportunity. After all, they could only succeed in this operation. Once they took action, they could not afford to wait any longer. This is the first time I've hoped for a larger particle storm to appear, Knight joked. Isn't that so? In the past, when I heard about a particle storm, I would run as fast as I could and avoid it. I've never looked forward to it this much. Feng Haichao exercised his arms and prepared for the upcoming operation. A person's strength is limited, no matter what. Sometimes, we have to rely on the right time and the right place. Yulu sighed. Even if he was a sharpshooter, so what? He had already faced many setbacks. Mingqi Arrow stood quietly behind him. He was silent, and Huimao had never come out of his cloak after he shrank back into it. The others thought that Huimao was tired and wanted to sleep, but Mengqi Arrow could sense that there was something off about Huimao. In truth, it probably wanted to follow Sillin out, didn't it? However, what was the reason for it to stay on the aircraft? While waiting for an opportunity, everyone discussed their next move. While the small particle storm was interfering, the White Spirit in the base had already started moving. She was choosing her target, and she had more than one target. This was because the robots in the research zone were not allowed to leave the research zone, and the robots in the living zone were not allowed to enter the research zone. On the surface of the planet, Sillin said to Cheto, "When the time comes, I'll take the vaccine. You support the White Spirit and prevent those people from forcefully interfering with the communication network. Don't hide your ability, just attack their control system directly. By time for the White Spirit. It doesn't matter even if all the control systems inside collapse, especially the martial arts system that can extend out. When the time comes, leaving will be easier. This time we can't do it quietly. Since we can't do it secretly, we'll do it openly. No matter what, with the White Spirit as the leader, even if we can't get the vaccine, we'll bring her back first. After all, the speed of a robot's movement while attached to it is far slower than her stealth speed in the network." "Yes, I will." Fortunately, after the small particle storm was over, the next one would be of a higher level. It was estimated that it would last around 15 to 17 minutes. "Let's go with this one. This is already the longest storm we've been through," Sillin said. If they waited any longer, there was no telling if there would be another storm that lasted longer than 10 minutes. "Then it's decided. You can start preparing now. I'll send them over too," Cai Jincheng answered. While waiting for the particle storm, Cai Jincheng informed everyone on the spaceplane. Like before, everyone except Kong Man and Alan started moving. Mengqi Aoyuo was not among them. He and Huimao were also on the spaceplane. There were 14 space fighters. The space fighters were not big, and there were only 2 seats in the cockpit. One was for the pilot, and the other was reserved for the people who would receive them when the time came. Can these fighters really withstand the particle storm? Knight looked at the fighters in front of him doubtfully. He wasn't afraid, he was just puzzled. If they can't, they'll still be affected. But let's fly the fighters over first and hide behind the asteroids closest to the planet. Even if we can't withstand the particle storm, we can still activate our shields and hold on for a while. The possibility of being discovered is very small, Cai Jincheng said. In reality, even if the possibility of being discovered was very small, they weren't going to activate their shields. Everything would be for naught if they were discovered. Just hide inside the fighters with the protective suits. It's fine as long as we don't die. It's not like we're those weaklings. Didn't you see that Sillin and Cheto have survived a couple of rounds already? Pride raised his chin and looked at Knight and the others disdainfully. Knight curled his lips. I was just saying. Let's go. Cut the crap. Lung had already jumped into the space fighter. The others also jumped in one after another. Menji Arrow was still standing at his original position in the control room. Alan didn't really know how to start a conversation, but he didn't have the time right now. He had too much work to do. As for Kong Man, he was still the main pilot of the spaceplane. He had even less time to take care of people, so he just sat there and didn't say a word. The originally lively discussion in the control room suddenly quieted down. The signal points of the space fighters that flew out could be seen on the screen in the control room. These signal points were all moving towards that planet. Menji Arrow lowered his head and looked at Huimao, who was hiding inside his cloak. The cat was currently propping up its ears and moving them from time to time. It was obvious that it wasn't asleep and had been paying attention to the movements outside. It even looked a little nervous, and the restless movements of its paws showed that the fellow had been itching for a long time, but had been suppressing it all along. Before the next particle storm arrived, Ci Jincheng and the others had already found cover and parked their space fighters on the nearest asteroids. They were waiting for an opportunity with their backs facing the planet. Silin and Cheto had changed their location. The previous passage was a little far from the passage that the White Spirit planned to transport the vaccine out of. In order to better receive the White Spirit and save time, Silin and Cheto arrived at the passage they planned. This tightly sealed passage led to a place where the research zone and the living zone intersected. The research zone was more heavily guarded, and during the non-particle storm period, the security there was even tighter. It was probably to prevent information theft. That was why the White Spirit didn't attack from there. There were fewer entrances and exits there, and compared to the research zone, the defense of the planned passage was relatively lax. Although it would take half a minute longer to arrive here, it was safer. Also, there were only some large transport robots in the research zone, so it was impossible to transport the vaccine to the passage. No transport robot would go to the passage area, but the small robots in the living zone were different. There were a lot of them, and they would go to many places. There were also robots that came to the passage area to clean up, so they wouldn't attract any suspicion here. After receiving the preparatory information from Ci Jincheng and the others, Silin informed the White Spirit that they could begin. In the living zone, a small cleaning robot's eyes flashed with white light. Then, it headed towards a certain direction. There were too many robots like this in the living zone, so no one would pay attention to what this robot was doing. This small robot moved forward at the same speed as the other robots. Occasionally, it would stop to clean up some dirt on the ground. Although it would stop and do some work, and it would take a few turns to clean up the dirt, it was actually heading in the same direction. The small robot stopped at a corner near the passage. Just like the other cleaning robots, it would stop to rest after working for a while to save energy. After the little robot stopped in the research area, on the walkway outside several large laboratories, a robot that looked like a cart slowly moved forward. Every time it passed by a large laboratory's garbage outlet, it would stop, open the garbage outlet's outer cover, and take out some recycled, filtered, and some non-recyclable waste liquid from inside, and put them on the cart. This was also the underground base's cleaning robot. It was a robot that was only active in the research zone. They would transport the research lab's waste and some used non-recyclable high-risk items to one place for centralized disposal. The cleaning time of these robots was not fixed. Sometimes some labs were busier and there would be more waste, so these robots would clean up more frequently. Therefore, when this cleaning robot came over to clean up, it did not attract the attention of the researchers in the labs. Slowly it moved towards a fork. When it reached the fork, the lighting equipment in the passageway and the display screens of the various labs started flashing. The storm was coming. Some people in the lab began to curse. However, every time they encountered this situation, these people would stay in place, sit down to rest or take a nap. It was not a good idea to go out at this time. If they were unlucky enough to encounter a problem with the equipment, or if some equipment was accidentally damaged due to the discharge or explosion of this particle storm, it would be a tragedy. The walkway that used to be frequented by people from time to time was now empty. No one noticed that the cleaning robot did not move along its usual cleaning route. Instead, it turned a corner and went to the other side. Its speed was also a lot faster. Some of the hidden sensor equipment here were all on strike at this moment, and there was no response to the cleaning robot's non-set path. Soon, the cleaning robot stopped in front of a closed metal door. Inside the door, the storm did not affect it much. Perhaps it was because there were important things frozen here, And it took extra effort to build it. The instruments here were all working normally. The password lock on one of the refrigerated cabinets jumped a few times, and then it opened automatically. White mist spread out from inside. Not far away, there was a mechanical arm on a shelf. This mechanical arm was used to help pick up items from high places. Now it was moving the wheels below it. It came over to take out a box from the refrigerator, closed the refrigerator, and restored the settings and data on the door. There was also a password lock on the box. Just like the refrigerator, the data on the password lock flashed a few times, and then it was unlocked. The mechanical arm opened the box, revealing the contents inside. After checking, the mechanical arm closed the box again, and the password lock was restored. The mechanical arm moved the box to the door. When it reached the door, the warehouse door opened. When it opened, there was a prompt sound, but at this time, because of the influence of this particle storm, some of the instruments in the lab malfunctioned and sounded an alarm, covering the alarm sound of the warehouse door. At the same time, the screen in the control room of the research area kept flashing, and it was impossible to see what was happening there. At this moment, the monitor was leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed. The mechanical arm placed the box in a hidden position in the middle of the cart, then retreated, and the door closed. The cleaning robot retreated, calmly leaving at the fork, and went to the planned location. Everything here was quiet again. Sillin looked at the time. There were still 3 minutes left before the storm passed. 3 minutes was enough for the white spirit to reach the exit. 1 minute before the storm ended, the handover between the cleaning robot in the research area and the cleaning robot in the living area was completed. The box was moved from the former to the latter's cleaning slot. 30 seconds before the storm ended, the small robot reached the planned entrance and opened the tunnel. Beep. A sharp alarm rang through the entire base with a suppressive sound wave. What's wrong? Who opened the tunnel? Hurry up and investigate. The people in the base were stunned by the alarm. The storm had not completely ended, and some people were even wondering whether the particle storm had caused the system to malfunction. To be safe, the guards acted quickly. When they discovered the reason, the small robot with the box in the open tunnel had almost reached the exit outside. Activate the mandatory defense. But the storm hasn't stopped. Activate. Yes. The base was instantly in a panic. But soon, they discovered that the external defense system was not just affected by the particle storm. There was also some other reason that prevented the tunnel from being forcefully closed. Who is it? Outside the tunnel, Cheto's eyes flashed. He was dragging the defense system so that it could not forcefully close the tunnel. It was extremely difficult to do this while the particle storm was still ongoing. When the particle storm was about to end, the external tunnel was opened. The small robot came out of the tunnel, and Sillin and Xing rushed up to it at the same time. Sillin took the box, and Cheto took the white spirit back. While Sillin and Cheto were running toward the entrance of the passage, 5 space fighters swayed and flew toward them. Due to the particle storm, they couldn't maintain their stealth state at all, and they couldn't fly normally either. Fuck, this is the first time I've flown a space fighter in a particle storm. If the old man knew about this, he'd say we're crazy. Knight shouted while piloting the space fighter. However, his tone was filled with excitement. Although driving through the particle storm wasn't stable and dangerous, everyone's morale was high because they had obtained the vaccines for the 86 viruses. They were going to protect Sillin and Cheto even if it meant risking their lives. At a time like this, no one cared if the storm had stopped or not. By the time Sillin received the box, the 2 space fighters were already behind them. Sillin jumped into the air, and with the help of the thrusters, he directly entered the open hatch of the space fighter. On the other side, Cheto also entered the other space fighter. The storm had completely passed. The timing was just right. The space fighters behind them also flew over, and helped cover the 2 space fighters. The base that started to attack because the storm had stopped focused on the space fighters numbered D-793 and D-791 on their wings. They saw the 2 men jump into the 2 fighter jets with the same serial numbers. No matter what these people had taken, they had to kill Wuxia since they had come out of this place. The 2 large entrances on the surface had also opened, and a few space fighters flew out of them one after another to intercept the intruders. The exchange of fire between the two sides was very intense, but Sillin and Cheto's movements were simply too fast. By the time the base caught up to them, they were already close to the asteroid belt. However, this didn't dissuade the base's personnel from giving chase. Instead, they attacked even more crazily than before. In fact, they didn't even hesitate to use weapons like shockwave bombs. They didn't care even if their own people were within range of the shockwave. However, the 14 fighter jets were too cunning. They shuttled through the asteroid belts as nimbly as fish, skillfully avoiding the shockwaves and the other party's attacks. They even deliberately released a smoke bomb. The dispersed smoke and dust covered the area, making it difficult for the people at the base to see which two fighter jets they were. However, the base's personnel had already identified the numbers on the space fighters' wings, and they used almost all their firepower to attack the two space fighters. A space plane appeared from the asteroid belt. It didn't slow down, and just like the space fighters, it weaved through the asteroid belt and flew towards the periphery of the asteroid belt. At the same time, it opened its hatch to let the space fighters in. It didn't matter if the other space fighters flew in, but the base's personnel landed on the two space fighters numbered D-793 and D-791 at the very end. Unfortunately, these two space fighters were the strangest among the space fighters. They were extremely difficult to lock onto, and there were a couple of times when they performed super maneuvers such as rapid turning and dodging. Gradually, all 14 space fighters flew back into the spaceplane. The two space fighters that were targeted were the last to enter. After all of them had entered the spaceplane, the spaceplane's protective shield was activated, and it left the asteroid belt at full speed. Inside the spaceplane, the space fighters that Sillin and Cheto jumped out of weren't D-793 or D-791. Knight and Pride were the ones who jumped out of the two numbered space fighters. At this moment, the numbers on the space fighters' wings disappeared at the same time. Numbers were used to fool people in the first place. Who the fuck would be stupid enough to put a number on their own space fighter's wings and use it as a target? In reality, the base's personnel would have thought things through if they had calmed down, but they were too anxious at the time and neglected it. Chapter 418. Everyone knew that the asteroid belt was dangerous. Plus, there were some magnetic field disturbances here that increased the difficulty of flight. Therefore, most people would slow down after entering the asteroid belt to ensure their safety. However, right now the pursuit in the asteroid belt was incomparably crazy. Shattered asteroid fragments shot out in all directions like cannonballs, and the occasional shockwave would shatter everything within its area of effect. Many aircrafts were caught in the shockwave and destroyed indiscriminately. However, this did not cause the pursuers to stop or retreat. They kept on chasing after the spaceplane in front of them. Can we go any faster? Knight looked at the aircrafts that were chasing closely behind them on the screen. It looked like they were really going all out. The hardest people to deal with in this world were lunatics who didn't care about their lives. No, we're still in the asteroid belt after all, and the magnetic field and disturbances around us are too troublesome. Add to that the spaceplane's size, this speed is already reaching its limit. If we increase our speed any further, we won't be able to guarantee our safety. If we crash into those asteroids, even if it's just a slight graze, the people behind us will seize the opportunity and destroy the spaceplane. Xiai Jincheng said solemnly. They were all anxious. They had obtained the vaccines for the 86 viruses, but it wasn't easy to leave this place safely. After all, that planet was in the asteroid belt. Even leaving was troublesome, and they couldn't enter warp speed under these circumstances. It really wasn't easy to shake off the pursuers behind them. Kong Man was sweating profusely. Although Knight and Pride were currently assisting with piloting, his thoughts were highly focused right now in order to avoid wave after wave of increasingly concentrated shockwaves and cannon fire, as well as the scattered fragments and asteroids in front of them. The enormous amount of calculation in his brain and the control of his hands had reached their limits. Although he was tired and exhausted, he couldn't switch out now. This wasn't the time. Any mistake would cause all of his previous efforts to go to waste. Sillin opened the detailed star map of the asteroid belt, looked at the distance between their current location and the edge of the asteroid belt, and then looked at the pursuers behind them. He turned around and said to Ci Jincheng and the others, "If we don't consider avoiding the enemy's cannons and shockwaves, and increase our speed by half, do you have the confidence to avoid the asteroids?" Ci Jincheng thought for a moment. "Yes. We can," Knight answered without turning his head. Pride's reply was the same. "That's good." Sillin took off the thick protective suit and prepared to leave the control room. "Hey, where are you going?" Feng Haichao stopped Sillin and asked. "Create some trouble for those people behind us. We're almost at the edge now, but looking at the behavior of those people in the base, I reckon that there will be a large-scale explosion next. At that time it'll be difficult to avoid it." "Cause trouble? Right now, those fellows are rushing over here as if they're not afraid of death, and there are so many of them." As he spoke, Feng Haichao suddenly paused and looked at Sillin in shock. "Don't tell me you're going to go out alone to cover their retreat?" Sillin looked at his idiotic expression and replied, "I'm not that noble." With that, Sillin walked out. "Hey Sillin, are you confident? Do you need help?" Long called out. Sillin did not turn around. He made a "don't worry" gesture. "What is that guy planning to do?" the other people in the control room asked. "I don't know, Cheto. Do you know what that kid Sillin is planning to do?" Long looked at Cheto. Cheto looked up and calmly swept his gaze across the people around him. Then he took out a book and fell silent. "Everyone." Sillin walked toward the exit. By the time he got close to the exit, his body was already covered in armor. "Turn off the protective shield," Sillin said into the communicator. After the aircraft's protective shield was turned off, the hatch opened. Sillin flipped over and held onto the aircraft's outer shell tightly to prevent himself from being thrown out. The exit was above the aircraft at a 45-degree angle. Right now Sillin was stuck to this inclined surface. "Hey Sillin, are you okay? Do you want to slow down?" Knight asked from the communicator. "No need. Just stay in your previous state." Sillin stuck close to the aircraft's outer shell and slowly flipped over to face the pursuers behind him. With a shake of his hand, a cannon appeared in his hand. Some of the asteroid fragments created by the shockwave bomb had hit the aircraft's surface. Since the protective shield had been turned off, a couple of holes had been created. A fist-sized fragment smashed half a meter away from Sillin. Looking at the crater it created, if it had hit a person, even if they were wearing protective clothing or armor, they would at best be left half dead. The shockwave wouldn't stop, and the aircraft couldn't lock onto its target even if it was fast enough. This was also why the people on the aircraft didn't bother to shoot. Sillin held the cannon in his hand and searched for the best spot to use it. The aircraft traversing through the asteroid belt would sway slightly from time to time, due to the debris caused by the shockwave. Its surface was already full of holes. Fortunately, the aircraft's quality was reliable. So far, it was only a few superficial wounds. On the other hand, Sillin, who was holding the cannon barrel, did not seem to care about his surroundings at all. Even when the fragments collided with him a few times, or when he avoided an asteroid in front of him, Sillin did not seem to care about any of this. He did not even think about it. Right now, in his eyes, there were only the fighter aircrafts that were chasing after him, and the asteroids that were randomly distributed around him. Now's the time. A white net that seemed to be weaved out of lightning spread out from here. There wasn't just one. 3 large nets were spread out from 3 different directions. After shooting, Sillin immediately entered the hatch. "I'll leave it to you guys." Sillin lay on the ground outside the hatch and said to the people in the control room on the other end of the communicator. Kong Man and the others who were piloting the aircraft didn't have much energy to pay attention to what was happening right now. They only knew that there was a powerful force coming from behind, and it was very destructive. Lung and the others who weren't piloting the aircraft could clearly see that the white lightning weaved into a giant net, slicing the asteroids and the pursuing aircrafts into pieces. Every collision would result in an explosion of energy. When these energies were stacked together, it was like a huge bomb. The stacked and strengthened explosion spread out in all directions. The asteroids were blown to smithereens, and the aircrafts within the explosion range were no longer visible. They disappeared in the explosion and turned into cosmic dust. After Sillin entered the hatch, the aircraft's protective shield was activated again. The aircraft shook even more violently, but it didn't slow down. Pushed by the explosion, the aircraft's speed instantly increased. The people piloting the aircraft felt their adrenaline soar to the limit. It wasn't just the people piloting the aircraft. Even Lung and the others who were watching from the side felt suffocated by the tension. There were a couple of moments when the aircraft almost brushed past a couple of asteroids. They didn't even have the time to catch their breath before the almost collided situation happened again and again. Lying at the hatch entrance, Sillin didn't get up. Last time, his entire arm was almost crippled after firing a single shot, but now he had fired 3 shots in one go. His entire arm was numb, and his entire body was overwhelmed by intense exhaustion. Sillin decided that he might as well lie on the ground and rest for a bit. Even if Kong Man, Knight, and the others were too busy, Cheto and the White Spirit were still helping them from the shadows. If even they couldn't hold on together, then they had no choice but to resign themselves to fate. Sillin closed his eyes and counted the time. The moment Sillin opened his eyes, the aircraft had exited the asteroid belt, entered warp speed and left this place. It was only now that everyone began to breathe carefully. Their nerves were too tense just now, so much so that they couldn't even breathe properly. They could hear their own hearts pounding and their veins pressing against their blood, and they were still a little dazed. As for the people piloting the aircraft just now, their arms were shaking. What the fuck? That scared the hell out of me. Knight lay on the chair and stopped looking at the control panel. After the aircraft entered warp speed and set up autopilot, Feng Haichao and the others came over to take over the control panel. Judging from the current situation, the people behind them hadn't caught up to them yet. Lung pinched his arm. Thank goodness I'm still alive. I didn't crash into those asteroids and end up as a decoration for the stars. Hey Sillin, are you alright? It was only now that everyone had the chance to pay attention to Sillin. It was because Sillin hadn't entered the control room yet. I'm alright. Sillin had already taken off his armor and staggered inside. I'm going to rest for a bit. The box containing the vaccine had been stored away by C.I. Jincheng. Those instruments were also beginning to analyze the vaccine and create more vaccines based on it. Are you really alright? I'm fine. Sillin walked into his own lounge. Call me if there's anything urgent. MN, rest well. Right now Knight and the others were tired as well. They really needed a break. After enduring the particle storm head-on and going through this stressful event, everyone needed rest and self-recovery. After Sillin entered the lounge, Huimao crawled out of Mengqi Arrow's cloak and signaled Mengqi Arrow to go to Sillin's lounge. Mengqi Arrow didn't say anything and walked in the direction Huimao pointed. When they arrived at the entrance of Sillin's lounge, Huimao hopped off and asked Mengqi Arrow to sit beside him for a while. It then entered Sillin's lounge by itself. Sillin sat by the bed instead of lying down to rest. It seemed to be waiting for Huimao. Huimao looked at Sillin and jumped onto the bed after making sure that Sillin wasn't heavily injured. Is that thing done? Sillin asked. Yes, it's done. Huimao opened his mouth and spat out a transparent liquid container that was 30 centimeters tall. There was an object the size of an egg in the transparent liquid container. It was moving as if it was going to come out. Sillin opened the can of liquid, and the thing inside came out and climbed up Sillin's outstretched palm. Sillin smiled as he looked at the thing in his hand. Is this thing really useful? It doesn't look like the nightmare taper. Isn't the nightmare taper very small? This thing is too big. Huimao commented on the thing that crawled out of the liquid container. The reason Whis didn't participate in the operation this time was because Sillin had given it a mission. Certain conditions were needed for the thing inside the liquid tank to grow, but those conditions were too harsh. In fact, a single violent shake might cause the thing to stop growing. Therefore, Sillin had given the liquid tank to Whis. Therefore, the gray cat began its incubating life for a period of time. It nested peacefully inside Mengqi Arrow's cloak and slept. Fortunately, the thing grew very fast. It grew from a tiny grain that was barely visible to the naked eye to its current size in such a short time. Sillin took a good look at the thing in his hand quietly. In terms of size, There was indeed a huge difference between it and the nightmare taper. However, it looked 80% similar to the nightmare taper in terms of appearance. Moreover, its genes were more than 99% similar. After all, it was the nightmare taper that was born from it. Yes, the thing in Silen's hand was all sorts of genetic information that Silen decoded based on Communidin's records. After connecting it with the information that he obtained today, it was the ancestor of the man-made nightmare taper. In other words, it was the so-called primordial before it was modified by the virus. This primordial body could help Silen locate the dream taper. No matter if it was the dream taper's mother, the dream taper's offspring, or even the dream tapers that had been split into a few generations, it could sense them as long as they were within a certain range. Silen named this primordial Emperor. The primordial being called Emperor stayed in Silen's hand for a while. Then it followed Silen's order and burrowed into Silen's palm. The protruding skin gradually subsided, and it was impossible to tell that a thing the size of an egg had just entered his palm. Due to the nightmare taper's tiny size, it was difficult to catch them. According to the information that they had gathered earlier, it took them a lot of effort to catch the nightmare taper that had split from its offspring. He could only control the virus after he had the nightmare taper under control. If the virus didn't work, then he could only rely on the nightmare taper. While Silen was thinking, he noticed that Huimao had suddenly quietened down beside him. He looked over and saw that the cat was propping up its ears. The fur on its ears was trembling, and it was obviously eavesdropping on something. Moreover, it looked more and more impatient with disdain and contempt. It was probably something bad. As expected, it didn't take long before Cai Jincheng contacted Silen to discuss some matters with him. Everyone was gathered in the control room. Just now, Cai Jincheng had told them the new news he had received. Communication had become much smoother after they left the asteroid belt, and they were in a hurry to contact the army they were in for support. Knight, Pride and the others had their own channels of understanding as well. They didn't need Cai Jincheng's additional explanation. According to the news Cai Jincheng had just received, his father had asked him to hurry to Sector J's planet, JC-335. Something had happened there. It was said that Senior Senator Bisor had been infected with more than one virus there. Cai Jincheng wasn't the only one. Knight and Pride had also received the same order when they contacted their fathers. The main reason they were worried about Bisor was because they wanted to obtain Bisor's support. This was because Bisor had always been a famous neutral party in the League of Stars' political scene. If they could obtain Bisor's support at a time like this and make him owe them a favor, they believed that they would be able to obtain Bisor's vote in the future. The army never separated from politics. Although it looked like the 8 corps were the ones causing the most trouble right now, the few big families in the political scene were secretly making big moves as well. It was just that they were keeping a lower profile compared to the army. The power and ability in their hands couldn't be ignored, and the more support they received in the division of power in the future, the higher their chances of success would be. They finally had an opportunity like Bisor, and it just so happened that Cai Jincheng and the others had obtained another set of vaccines at this time. Not only that, on the day before they contacted their families, a research team had obtained 62 types of vaccines while they were researching the descendant nightmare taper that they had captured after much difficulty. Although there were a few overlaps with the vaccines Cai Jincheng and the others obtained, this was undoubtedly a great chance and a great hope. Double insurance. Knight, Cai Jincheng, Pride and the others were in an alliance with each other. Therefore, if they could obtain Bisor's support at this time, their alliance would undoubtedly become even stronger. Right now, the vaccine they obtained had sent the analyzed information to all parties, and they could synthesize the vaccines based on this information. The cure and prevention operation had begun, and just like the politicians were clamoring for, the counterattack against the nightmare taper had begun. After that, they would have to rely on their own abilities to get support. There were still a few other important suspected bases on the star map they obtained from Monquiero, but Cai Jincheng and the others had already contacted their own army. Naturally, there would be people taking action. What they needed to do now was to use this set of vaccines to save Bisor, and hope that the virus Bisor was infected with would be within the range of the vaccine's effects. Someone from planet JC335 has arrived to receive us. After all, the equipment on the spaceplane isn't complete, and the analysis information is limited. If we want to understand the virus better, we'll have to start with this set of vaccines for more detailed information. The person receiving us will take a part of this vaccine for analysis and research, and the other part will be used for rescue. Of course, the first person to be rescued is that old man Bisor, said Knight. He was also explaining to everyone the reason behind their actions. To be honest, Knight did not have a good impression of Bisor at all. In the political scene, people like Bisor were either conservatives or cowards, if they were to put it nicely. He had never participated in the competition of those big interest groups, and he even abstained during the voting on the miracle. He abstained 20 years ago, and he abstained again this time. Knight felt like he had swallowed a fly in his heart when he realized that he had to save a person like this first to obtain the vaccines he had gone to great lengths to obtain. Sector J? That place seems to be a heavily infected zone right now. Lung frowned and drummed his fingers on the table. He didn't look as sloppy as he usually did, and he looked a little quiet. Right now, almost all of the trade zones are heavily infected zones. However, the ones infected are basically the civilians. Those with some power have armed their own territories and guarded them with 3 layers of defense. Kong Man's eyelids were drooping, and his voice was low and emotionless. However, his words sounded very resentful. Even if everyone was unwilling, Bisor's priority in assigning positions to the committee as a senior senator was enough to move everyone's hearts. It was no wonder that C.I. Jincheng and his family had asked them to hurry over and rescue him, afraid that someone else would beat them to it. Sillin sat on his seat and listened to their conversation. He rubbed his palm and said, "Then let's go." Chapter 419. Planet J, C335 wasn't a very important planet in Sector J. It was just that it played a much bigger role in this incident. And the reason for that was Senior Senator Bisor. This was Bisor's home planet. It was also the second planet in Sector J to be heavily infected other than the transit planet during the Nightmare Taper incident. Bisor had been dealing with some personal matters when the planet was heavily infected. After the Nightmare Taper disaster broke out, Bisor ordered his subordinates to seal off the planet. It didn't take long before Bisor was diagnosed with the Nightmare Taper virus, and it wasn't just one type. When Sillin and the others arrived, they could already see the unusual state of alert the planet was in from afar. The spaceport was heavily guarded, and there were a couple of patrol fleets around to prevent outsiders from infecting the planet. They also strictly forbade internal personnel from leaving the planet. After all, this was a heavily infected planet. Right now the planet was in a sealed state. The energy shields that rose from the planet looked like the blisters on a patient's body, and it gave off a strange, morbid feeling. Although they were escorted by Senator Bisor's subordinates and received by the army, they still had to pay attention to the fact that no one else was trying to play dirty tricks at this time. Right now, the 8 great armies were divided into 2 alliances. The 3rd army which Fiegler was in, the 4th army which the G family controlled, the 7th army which the CI family controlled, and the 1st army which was under Marshal Daniel's command. This was an alliance of forces, and Old Mo's son, Mo Qing, was in the CI family's 7th army. The other alliance was led by the U family's 2nd army, and was made up of the 5th army, the 6th army and the 8th army. These 2 factions had an alliance like this before and after the League of Stars' chaos. It was just that it wasn't obvious in the past, but it was brought to the surface after the League of Stars' chaos. What C.I. Jincheng meant by this was to prevent the other group from interfering and causing trouble at this time. Those people might not do anything to Bisor, but C.I. Jincheng and the others who were ordered by his parents to treat and negotiate would soon become their targets. The spaceport landed. Their spaceport was not allowed to enter the planet, and there were already people from the 1st, 3rd, 4th and 7th armies stationed at the spaceport to receive them. Sillin looked at the situation. The people sent were all trusted people who were familiar with C.I. Jincheng and the others. For example, Ji Feihong from the Ji family. Pride was immediately beaten to the ground by Ji Feihong the moment he got off the spaceport. Since Pride had left home without permission and successfully made the elders go crazy with anxiety, Ji Feihong had beaten Pride to the ground like a chicken. Knight was in a similar situation. He was beaten into a pig's head by his cousin, Fiegler Holando. Cai Jincheng was slightly better off. He was only given a couple of verbal warnings, but of course he wouldn't let it slide just like that. He only delayed his punishment until he was done negotiating with Bisor, and then he would be dragged back to the Ci family to face the wall. As for Yu Lu and Feng Haichao, they didn't even dare to let out a fart in front of the officers and their superiors. After teaching Knight a lesson, Holando swept a glance at them. They were all very obedient. Didn't they see how badly Knight was beaten? Long Yuze sat at the side. The people who came were all military personnel and political figures, but none of them could control young Master Long. They were the only ones who were more relaxed here. Long patted Alan and pointed at the people who were being scolded. Note them down and report them when the time comes. We'll let everyone see the fate of heroes. Didn't your Grandpa Fox tell you to go back? Sillin turned his head and asked. Long curled his lips. I didn't turn on my communicator. Sillin. Sitting at the side, Sillin, Cheto, Meng Aluo, Long and Alan watched the people not far away get scolded. Compared to the people over there, they were a lot more relaxed. They could take a breather, have some tea and snacks, and they didn't have to worry about viruses. After all, this was a military spaceport with multiple layers of defense. There were detection devices both inside and outside the spaceport. Since Hulandu and Ji Feihong had been dispatched here, there was nothing for Knight and Pride to do. The negotiations could be left to Hulandu and the others, who were more important to handle. Since the project team in the military had successfully prepared 62 types of virus vaccines, a couple more good news came out one after another. The number of vaccines was gradually increasing, and many places were already starting to carry out treatment. After the tension of the nightmare taper incident, everyone felt that it was time to catch their breath. However, Sillin couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Right now, the project team that caught a descendant nightmare taper had become the focus of everyone's attention. Moreover, the people of the 1st, 3rd, 4th and 7th armies treated this project team like a treasure. Not only did this project team give them hope of solving the nightmare taper incident, it also raised the reputation of this joint organization to unprecedented heights. The diplomats of the 4 legions walked out with their backs straight, and their words full of vigor. Sillin had asked Cai Jincheng about the person in charge of the project team, and the members of the entire project team, but Cai Jincheng himself did not know just who was in the team. This was because the project team had undergone a personnel change not too long ago, and it was no longer the original team that Cai Jincheng knew. Knight and Pride didn't know the reason behind this change either. Judging from Holando and Ji Feihong's appearance, they didn't seem to be worried about the nightmare taper incident at all. If they were this confident, Sillin had no choice but to think about the main person in charge of the project team. As far as he knew, although the few heavyweights of the original project team were influential in the League of Stars and had appeared in the 2 top magazines, Glory and Code, Sillin didn't believe that they could create almost 100 types of virus vaccines in such a short time. It wasn't that Sillin was looking down on them. Sillin just felt that after the personnel change, the main person in charge of the project team would definitely not be the same as before. However, other than those famous masters, who else could have such a powerful ability? Hey Sillin, are you coming with us? Knight shouted from the other side. Holando, who was talking to Bisor's men in front, frowned. He glanced at Ji Feihong and saw that he didn't say anything. Cai Jincheng and the others also wanted to move together. No one was willing to stay here alone, so they didn't object to Sillin Helong and the others coming with them. This wasn't their territory anyway, so they might as well bring them along. They wouldn't feel at ease leaving these people here. Before leaving the spaceport and heading towards the planet, Sillin looked at the communicator in his hand. There were 2 messages on it. What's wrong? Lung asked when he saw that Sillin had stopped. It's about the 11 squad. After replying to the message, Sillin led Cheto and the others onto the spaceplane heading towards the planet. This spaceplane was specially arranged by Bisor. Holando, Ji Feihong and some of their people, as well as Sillin and the others, were all sitting inside. There were battles going on in many places on the planet. Those who were sick to the point that they couldn't control their emotions due to the virus were all on the killing list. Before the vaccine was obtained, the so-called solution to the problem was to kill them directly. Right now, Bisor's men were busy cleaning up the planet. Guards in combat uniforms and medical personnel in white protective suits were running all over the place. This kind of situation could be seen in many places on the planet. A portion of the vaccine had been sent out for evaluation, and the remaining portion was used as a cure for the disease. The medical equipment was already producing more vaccines based on this vaccine. After all, there was a limit to how many of these vaccines there were. Sillin had already sent all kinds of information about the vaccines to Vanguard, the Freedom Army, and the people at Sector S. The information about the 86 vaccines was no longer a secret in the first place. Anyone with some means and some effort would learn about it sooner or later. It wouldn't be long before they got their hands on the remaining vaccines developed by the military. The biggest energy shield on the planet was located in the central city of the planet. It was also the seat of the planetary government, and it was where Bisor was resting. The energy shield was divided into several layers. After the spaceplane entered the first energy shield, it would be scanned for viruses. Every person who got off the spaceplane had to undergo a strict inspection to ensure that they weren't carrying any fatal viruses. It was only after several layers of inspection that they were allowed to enter the central city. Right now, the city had already experienced the initial chaos caused by the spread of the virus. It had been cleaned up by Bisor's guards and the planetary government. It could be said that other than Bisor and a few core officials, no one else in the central city had been infected by the virus. It was because those who were infected had been executed a long time ago. There were surveillance devices and virus scanning equipment everywhere in the city. Although it was understandable, no one would be in a good mood after being scanned by those scanners again and again. It was as if they had no privacy at all. Especially those who came from the military. Especially those who came from the army. They were used to being nervous and resisted the urge to avoid it. Fuck. Knight cursed after he was scanned by the scanners flying around in the air once more. Alright, just bear with it. Hulan Duo slapped Knight across the face and motioned for him to shut up. Although he himself was very annoyed by those scanners, there was nothing he could do about it. Every heavily infected planet would see these machines. When they scanned and discovered an infected person, they would sound a warning and start killing them. This was the situation in the past. Now the infected person would be sent to a treatment site first. If the infected person was within the range of the vaccine's effectiveness, then they could be injected. If the infected person wasn't within the range of the vaccine's effectiveness, they could choose to receive other treatments first. After all, new vaccines were produced one after another, and the infected person would have a chance to recover by the day. If the infected person really couldn't hold on and lost control of their emotions, or their illness was too severe to control, they would be thrown into the treatment station and dealt with. A squad of guards came over. Every one of them was wearing a combat uniform from head to toe. Sillin had seen this kind of attire in other places on the planet before. Sillin and the others were also wearing protective suits, including Cheto and Monquiero, who were requested by Sillin. However, the protective suits were obviously different from what the people in this city wore. Many people looked at them curiously when they entered the city. I feel like I'm in a zoo. I feel like I'm a monkey, Lung muttered at the side. Sillin didn't comment on this. Right now his attention was attracted by something else. The emperor in his palm was moving. It wanted to come out, but Sillin suppressed it forcefully. He didn't want to cause any trouble at this time. The only thing that could make the emperor move was the nightmare taper. Judging from the emperor's reaction, the nightmare taper should be within the city's boundaries. However, it was impossible for the nightmare taper to appear when there were so many scanners and all kinds of mechanical defenses in this city. Otherwise, the scanners' alarms would have gone off a long time ago. The people who were waiting for them inside the city led them to a place to rest. After all, they weren't going to meet Councilman Bisor all at once. A representative was enough. All right, Knight and the rest of you stay here for now. We're going to meet Councilman Bisor. Behave yourselves. Hulanduo glanced at everyone while saying this. After everyone gave their word, Hulanduo carried the vaccine set and went to talk to Bisor with Ji Feihong and the other high-ranking officers. The vaccine was one of the reasons. The other reason was that they needed to talk further in order to obtain Bisor's support. The negotiation couldn't be concluded in a short period of time. Hulanduo was worried about Knight and the others, so he reminded them several times before leaving. Knight and the others finally relaxed after Hulanduo and the other high-ranking officers left. Motherfucker, that was brutal. Knight rubbed his face through the protective suit. His face was swollen from the beating. Pride didn't say anything, but he didn't look like he was feeling any better than Knight. He was beaten quite heavily. Can't we take off the protective suit? It's uncomfortable to wear it. Lung moved his arms. It didn't feel good to be restrained by the protective suit. Just wear it. Who knows when a nightmare taper will jump in? There are only 100 or so vaccines, and more than half of them are unknown. If you get infected, you'll have to be locked up for treatment for a longer period of time. It's not worth it. Xi Jincheng advised. As they were talking, Huimao, who was hiding in Silen's backpack, rushed out and ran outside. Meow, your grandpa is going to look for food. Xi Jincheng and the others wanted to stop him, but Huimao disappeared before they could even make it in time. Silen, don't let Weez get out. This isn't our territory. It won't be easy to handle if there's a conflict. Xi Jincheng said. The people outside are cleaning up. I don't see a single pet on the streets. They've probably been hunted and killed. Silen, call Weez back. Knight also suggested. Amen, I'll go ring that cat back. Silen stood up and walked outside. I'll go with you. I'll go too. Knight and Xi Jincheng both stood up and followed. Silen wasn't from the military, so it would be easier if they followed him. Even if he didn't want to give them face, he should at least give face to the two armies behind them, right? After Knight and Xi Jincheng caught up, Lung and Pride followed as well. The others who wanted to follow were stopped by the people Hulanduo left behind. They couldn't stop the first few, but they could still stop Yulu and the others. After all, their ranks weren't high. Before the officer Hulanduo left behind to guard the gate could persuade Knight and the others to go in and sit obediently, they heard gunshots coming from outside. Silen pushed the officer in front of him away and rushed out. The others followed behind him. Just like what Knight and the others said, the guards' first reaction when they saw a cat was to kill it. Because of the nightmare taper, all the pets in this city had been hunted and killed. There wasn't even a mouse or a fly left. However, how could Huimao be captured so easily? The guards who went after Huimao failed to capture Huimao. Instead, they injured a few of their own people. Also, before the guards could say anything to the few people who came out, Silen rushed up and beat up the few people who were holding guns at the front. Now the scene was explosive. Silen didn't hold back when he started beating people up. One punch after another knocked them to the ground. Not only that, he was shouting as he beat them up. How dare you shoot my cat? I'll beat all of you to death. Meanwhile, Huimao, who was next to him, seemed to have received encouragement. He got even cockier and showed no signs of stopping at all. The officer who was walking out quickly felt a headache coming on as he watched the scene. At that moment, people around them noticed what was going on. Another 2 teams of guards rushed over. However, since it was not because of the virus, the detection machines flying in the sky did not react. Knight and the others saw the 2 teams of guards rushing over. These people were about to raise their guns, so Knight joined the fight without hesitation. It was one thing for them to use their fists, but how dare they raise their guns? Meanwhile, Huimao darted between these people. They did not even manage to touch its fur. The face of the high-ranking officer who had been left behind by Holando turned green behind his mask. He shouted loudly for both sides to stop, but the situation only became more and more intense. Left with no choice, the officer called over his men and pulled the 2 sides apart. He then negotiated with the captain of the other side's guard for a long time, apologizing and making promises. Only then did the conflict calm down. After things calmed down, Huimao nestled in Silen's arms obediently. It did not have any self-awareness that it had done something bad. It licked its paws leisurely and did not look at the officer, who looked like he wanted to pull out his gun and shoot it. "Let's go in. I'll leave this to Colonel Max," Knight called out to Sillin. He waved his arm and walked into the room. Max, the officer who had been left behind by Hulandu to watch over these little devils, had a gloomy face. He patiently negotiated with the captain of the guards on the other side and discussed the issue of compensation. After all, quite a few members of the 3 guards on the other side had been injured. A few of them were more seriously injured and were dragged back for treatment. However, their lives should not be in danger. While negotiating with the other party, Max was still thinking that the cat was really powerful. It could even tear through the other party's protective suit. It scratched so hard that it bled. While walking into the room, Ci Jincheng was still thinking about how Sillin had been a bit impulsive just now. He charged up and beat up the other party without even asking anything. Also, everyone knew about Huimao's abilities. Those people could not get on it at all, so why did Sillin have to attack at this critical moment in the negotiation? Also, wasn't that cat's claws a little too heavy? Most of the people from the 3 teams who had come over were bleeding from Huimao's claws. Also, the strange thing was that Cheto and Monquiero did not attack this time. It seemed like they were not worried at all. There was nothing to be worried about, was there? There was no way that cat would be caught so easily. Ci Jincheng thought, but he felt that something was wrong. He was about to ask Sillin when the communicator in his hand rang. There was a message on it. Ci Jincheng was not the only one. Knight, Pride and the others' communicators also showed the same message. These people are from Miracle. Chapter 420. Everyone had formed a tacit understanding after joining Ci Jincheng's taper extermination team for such a long time. Moreover, no one in this team was an idiot. They might look reckless and insensible, but they were actually better at pretending than anyone else. Sillin's behavior just now was nothing in the eyes of those who didn't know him, but to those who were familiar with Sillin, it was like going crazy. And when the word going crazy was applied to Sillin, it meant there was a problem. This was why Ci Jincheng, Knight and the others rushed forward to help Sillin. And now they received their answer. Huimao obtained blood samples from the people who were scratched, and from the information obtained from these blood samples, Sillin knew that these people didn't come through normal means. These people's genes had been modified after birth. This kind of modification wasn't like the self-improvement and repair of genetic medicine, but a miraculous implantation. Miraculous, people like to implant a lot of functional genes into some strong individuals, making them stronger, more well-rounded, and more destructive, even if this change would greatly shorten the individual's lifespan. All information could be obtained from the blood. The reason these people in the city wore thick protective clothing wasn't just to prevent viruses. It was also to prevent more information from being leaked. There were always some individuals who would give themselves away when they went berserk. Their faces and appearances would change abnormally when they were agitated, so protective clothing was a very good cover. Ci Jincheng and the others did not doubt Sillin's conclusion. When they received this information from Sillin, they quickly used their own methods to secretly pass this information to Holando, Ji Feihong, and the others who went to meet Councilman Bisor. The people who were resting here all began to communicate with each other through various secret methods. It was because they weren't sure if there would be hidden surveillance equipment in this resting area. Colonel Max, I'm so sorry, those people are really fucking bastards. Knight walked over and said to Colonel Max, who was giving off a dark aura. Max was a member of the 3rd Corps, so he was definitely trustworthy since Holando had asked him to stay. When Knight said this to him, he must have used a method that both of them knew to pass on the message. The real meaning was not through hand gestures, but other methods that outsiders wouldn't know. Sillin didn't think that Knight would waste his breath at a time like this. Max also cooperated with Knight, and said a lot of things after Knight's pleasantries. Therefore, Sillin came to a conclusion. This was also a pretentious person. Holando had left some people here, as well as in the spaceport. After all, this was Bisor's territory, and he would definitely not allow a large number of people to enter. Sillin and the others stayed here to rest. They didn't act immediately. They just used the fastest and most covert method to pass the message, so that they could prepare as soon as possible. There's a nightmare taper in this city. That was the second message that Sillin sent them. However, since they found out that the guards were Miracle's men, it was no longer strange that the nightmare taper was here. They weren't sure if Bisor was related to the people of Miracle. Perhaps someone from Miracle had infiltrated this place? No matter what the situation was, it was always good to be prepared. They would have to see the reaction of Holando and the others to determine what the situation was. If they fought Bisor, they would definitely be on the opposite side. If that was the case, they might have to face the entire planet's guards. 2 minutes later, Knight received a message from Holando. Retreat. This word alone confirmed Bisor's position. They were on the opposite side. At the same time Knight told the others this news, there was an explosion at the Central Administration building where the negotiations were taking place. Retreat. Knight roared. In an instant, the seemingly peaceful situation suddenly exploded. The guards gathered here, and the people who were resting here began to fight back. They wanted to leave this place. It would be best if they could leave the city. They couldn't care less about Holando, and Holando didn't seem to want them to wait either. They split up. Knight, Pride and the others dodged the enemy's attacks as they retreated out of the city. There were residents in the city who didn't know what was going on, but they were in the minority. These few residents would die in the indiscriminate attacks of the guards. These innocent people were left behind only to provide cover. At times like this, those who lived at the bottom were always the victims. The guardsmen were no longer as conservative as they were when they were fighting Sillin and the others. Their pincers tore through the protective suits, and their entire bodies began to change. They looked very similar to those biochemical beasts, but these guardsmen were of a higher level. They possessed human intelligence and thought as their main focus, and they were able to control themselves. They were just like the excellent experimental subjects that Howley Hansen had chosen back then. These guards were no longer suppressed. Each leap they made covered a distance of more than 10 meters. They moved from the street to the end in the blink of an eye. Menji Aluo had thrown away the protective suit a long time ago. To him, this thing was a restraint, a complete restraint. He rarely used his hands. Most of the time, he only used his wings. However, in the face of these guards, he used his hands. His hands had sharp claws similar to Shisag's. They could easily pierce through an enemy's body. His entire arms were like steel. When they smashed into the guards, only cracking sounds could be heard. Menji Aluo couldn't control his strength, so he didn't use his hands often. However, he didn't need to worry about his strength when fighting these people. Sillin had said to fight with all his might. The scanning machines in the air displayed Sillin and the others' positions clearly. This was a reference for the other guards who were rushing over. The previous scan was not to see if the visitors carried the virus, but to remember the characteristics of these people, as if they were marking them. Bam! A scanning machine flying in the air fell to the ground like it was paralyzed. Bam bam bam. One after another, the scanning machines fell to the ground, never to rise again. All of their programs were in chaos in an instant. They didn't know how to react at all. They didn't know how to fly. They could only be pulled by gravity and smashed into the ground. This was Huemao's handiwork. They looked up at the sky. Through the transparent energy shield, they could see the ball of fire in the sky. It was quite eye-catching even in the bright daylight. The spaceport had exploded, and the battle had begun. The debris of the explosion entered the atmosphere, and the sparks from the friction rained down on the planet like a meteor shower. It seemed to raise the planet's temperature. However, no one was in the mood to watch this meteor shower. The air was filled with the smell of blood and death that was getting thicker and thicker. Max ordered his men to protect Knight and the others. Since Hulando had entrusted them to him, Max would do his best to protect them even if he had to die here. However, Max didn't expect that they would have to deal with something other than the guards in the city. Outside the city was a wide moat. Based on Miracle's nature, she wouldn't put anything gentle in it. At this moment, a large number of strange creatures crawled out of the moat and quickly made their way over. Just as Max was about to order a change in direction, Sillin shouted, "Don't change direction. Go that way, cross the river. Max thought about it and agreed. Since it was a moat, the entire river almost surrounded the city. Where could they hide? It was better to just charge head-on. Before Max could finish his thought, Sillin added, "Don't shoot at those river beasts. Focus on dealing with the guards." Max choked. The next moment, Knight roared at him. "Do as he says." This way, not only would Max's men not deal with the river beasts that were rushing over, the guards would not deal with them either. This caused the river beasts to approach them even faster. The guards were hoping that the river beasts would stop these people and tear them apart. Max and the others were anxious. They didn't know whether they should fire at the river beasts or not. After all, the monsters were getting closer and closer. However, they soon realized that it didn't seem to be the case. Usually, the things in the river would help the guards deal with external enemies, but now, these ugly fellows were fighting against the guards in the city. They didn't even care about the few soldiers from the army who had fired at them at close range just now and charged straight at the guards. Their target was clear. The ones that crawled out of the river, big and small, ranging from the size of watermelons to 30 to 40 meters long, swung their long tentacles and opened their huge pincers with serrated teeth. They passed through the space between Max and the others and pounced at the guards. The ones with long legs leaped over their heads and headed straight for the guards. Max could clearly smell the muddy and aquatic odor of the river beasts around him, above him, and in all directions. The smell that he used to find incomparably disgusting was now more exciting than the perfume of the woman he had a crush on. Max didn't know what was going on. He only knew that he and the others had a way out. Sillin looked at Lung, and the latter made a done gesture. He could even tame those giant creatures in the sea, let alone these river beasts. Even if these river beasts were genetically modified, they were still river beasts. They retained their aquatic instincts and could respond to Lung's summons. Bang bang bang. Above their heads, a few misty spots appeared on the gigantic energy shield that enveloped the entire central city. Starting from these few spots, it was as if solid ice was melting. Multiple spots began to extend towards the surroundings and slowly melted away. In the sky outside the energy shield, for robots were flying. The blue stripes on their faces flickered. They activated the weapons on their bodies and attacked the energy shield. Looking at the sky, Sillin smiled. Sillin had received 2 messages earlier. The first one, "Captain, we're here too." From Yudi. The second one, "Let ice cream play. I won't show myself." From Hidden Wuxia. Chapter 421. The energy shield above Central City melted away layer by layer. This was no longer a sealed-off battlefield. The people in black armor stepped on hoverboards and flew over, covering the people by the moat as they evacuated out of the city. A large white ball fell from the sky and smashed into the middle of a group of guards, creating a pit. The guards who were hit never got up again. The white ball rolled around in the crowd and rolled towards Sillin. Black armor appeared on its body. Although it didn't completely cover it, it could protect some of the important parts. The bullets that hit the armor made clanking sounds, and the laser bullets did not cause much damage when they collided with the armor. When it got close to Sillin's location, the white ball leaped up and swiftly unfurled itself. 2 human figures came out of the white ball, and the unfurled white fatty was active around Sillin at a speed that did not match his body size. He slapped some of the guards who came close to him flat, and sometimes he would jump up and grab a fighter that was flying low in the sky and smash it to the ground by its wings. On its furry head, the semicircular ears were turning, alert for other dangerous situations in its surroundings. What a ferocious fatty! That was the collective thought of everyone who saw the scene. The 2 people who were protected by Snowball were wearing armor similar to Celine's, but they looked like children who had not yet reached adulthood. The petite figure who was moving around the fatty held a strange gun in her hand. It was quite similar to the one Celine used. Every time she fired, several guards would fall. As for the other small figure, he waved his long, sharp claws and fought against the guards, not falling into a disadvantageous position. Max was dumbfounded when he saw the newcomers. They weren't from his army, nor were they from the other 3 allied armies. Team 11. What? Max was busy firing his gun. The explosions around him came wave after wave. Even if he was talking into the communicator, he had to shout to be heard clearly. That was why he didn't hear what Knight said. He's from the 11th Vanguard, Silen's teammate. Friendly forces, Knight explained again. Max didn't hear the first part of the sentence clearly, but he heard the last part clearly. The word allies sufficed. No matter what kind of person the other party was, it was fine as long as they were not enemies. The bridge that connected Central City to the outside had already been retracted, but the river beasts in the river had attached themselves to the surface of the river, forming a floating bridge for Max and the others to cross. Some of them had hoverboards or other flying aids, but they did not use them to fly to the other side. Relatively speaking, it was safer to maintain the current formation. There were planet guards everywhere in Central City. Max and the others had to leave the city first and wait for reinforcements. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to handle those people. Central City began to shake violently, and fortress-like buildings rose from the ground, toppling over the buildings and residential buildings that were originally there. Some people similar to the guards ran out from inside. Other than people, there were also fighter jets and tanks. This place used to be a military base. It was just that for many years, this military base had been hidden underground, concealing its ferocity. Now it had revealed its true appearance. On the other side, Silen looked at the sky outside the city. The huge battleship had entered the planet. Due to the fierce attacks, its landing was not stable. The landing point produced a huge shockwave, and rocks were smashed into the air. The landing of the battleship stirred up dust, causing the area to be covered in a haze. However, after the haze, armors emerged one after another. Artillery fire shot out from the haze, and the dust did not affect their shooting. In the sky, fighter jets rushed into the atmosphere and flew over. Bang, bang, bang. The bodies of the fighter jets flashed past. At this moment, the concentrated firepower fired from the fighter jets blew up the guards in the form of biochemical beasts who had not been able to dodge in time into a cloud of blood mist. The people who had followed Hulan Duo and the others to guard outside the planet had come to help. Huimao, who had been jumping up and down around Silen, suddenly paused. His ears flicked, and he looked in a direction. In the sky over there, an object descended rapidly. This object directly stepped on a fighter jet of the guards in the air. It was a snow-white mechanical beast that was over 10 meters tall. It looked extremely awe-inspiring. What the fuck? Why is that stinky rat here? Huimao stared. It was too arrogant. It had actually appeared on this kind of battlefield in this form. The surrounding tanks and fighter jets were simply like toys as it threw them up and down and stepped on them. Silen, I'm going to play. Huimao did not want to be left behind. He spread his limbs and charged in the opposite direction of the crowd's retreat. There were many guards, tanks, and so on that had come out from the fortress. Huimao, who was running, dodged the artillery attacks. In reality, with its speed, it was very difficult to lock onto it. Moreover, it was not difficult to avoid those attacks. Just as he was about to reach the other side, he leaped up. 2 fighter jets happened to be flying over, and the direction in which Huimao leaped was just enough to pass through the gap between the 2 fighter jets. As Huimao leaped up, he rapidly changed his form. The huge beast-shaped mechanical beast spun in the air. The long claws that he extended were like rotating fans, cutting the 2 fighter jets that passed by him into comb-like teeth. After passing through the 2 fighter jets, Huimao landed on a tank and flattened it. The next moment, he leaped 20 meters away and started stepping on another tank. These 2 cyborg beasts seemed to be in a competition to see who could step more. As they stepped on each other, they started to fight each other as if they were having a snowball fight. With a hook of their tails, they would coil up the passing tanks or fighter jets that were flying past them and throw them at the other party. Wherever they ran, they would casually grab a tank and throw it at the other party. To these 2 cyborg life forms, this battlefield was indeed more like an amusement park. Here, they could do as much damage as they wanted without being scolded or having to pay for it. Lung and the others, who had already crossed the river, looked at the 2 big fellows jumping around and wreaking havoc in the central city and joked. Those 2 fellows have been waiting for this moment for a long time, haven't they? Sillin did not comment, but he was certain that Wuxia had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The middle-aged man was probably hiding in a corner somewhere, watching the two cyborgs play with each other. A group of soldiers in combat uniforms walked over and said a few words to Max before escorting them away. Sillin called Tang Qiuqiu and the others over, and they left together. The people from the 11th Squad had entered the planet via spaceplane. The starship was outside, so it did not come in. It was because the warships and combat squads of the military had already entered the planet, and there were fighter jets and spaceplanes everywhere. Yudi was afraid that he would become a target for both sides if he were to enter the planet. After all, the 11th Squad hadn't communicated with the military yet. The 11th Squad, who were providing air cover, also retreated after receiving Sillin's notice and flew towards the spaceplane. After the military had entered the planet, they quickly occupied a place to serve as their base. The soldiers were supposed to escort Knight and the others to this base. Moreover, Hulanduo and Ji Feihong were already waiting for them at the base. It would appear that the 134th, 134th, and 47th Legions weren't unprepared this time. They were fully prepared, or they wouldn't have brought such a well-equipped combat squad with them. The other reinforcements were probably on their way as well. Sillin led the 11th Squad into the base. Since Ci Jincheng and Knight had informed them beforehand, the soldiers guarding outside the base didn't stop them. The 11th Squad's spaceplane landed on the empty ground outside the base, and a few more fighter jets of the 11th Squad followed suit. Yudi, who was clad in armor, stepped out of the aircraft. Following behind Yudi was old Mo, who was clad in protective gear. Sillin walked over quickly. "Why are you here too?" Sillin relaxed when he saw that Mo Heng's complexion looked fine behind the transparent mask. Sir Mo was very dissatisfied with Sillin's reply. "What? Are you the only one allowed to come? Am I not allowed to come as well?" "No, you." Mo Heng waved his hand and stopped Sillin. "This old man has been through a lot of things like this when I was young. You don't have to worry about me." How could he not worry? Sillin mumbled in his heart. This was a battlefield, but there was an unknown virus lurking behind it. One could get infected at any time. Moreover, the Emperor in Sillin's palm was reacting more and more violently. This meant that there must be more than one nightmare taper around. At the same time, the detection machines were either destroyed or broken in such a situation. They could not be of any use at all. The protective suit wasn't omnipotent. Many people had torn protective suits, cracked masks, and puncture wounds. These were all people who could be easily infected. While Sillin and Mo Heng were chatting, Max walked over quickly. Knight asked him to call Sillin over, but before he could speak, Max saw Sir Mo's face behind the transparent mask. Slap. A military salute. "Hello, Elder Mo." Mo Heng looked at Max, who was standing in front of him. "Oh, I remember you. Lieutenant Max, no Colonel." Max was confused. Why was Sir Mo with the hunters from Vanguard? However, there was no time for Max to think about it. He passed Knight's message to Sillin and invited Mo Heng over. Since they had bumped into each other, they could not let Sir Mo stay here just like that. Sillin nodded. After informing Yudi and the rest, he and Mo Heng arrived at a medium-sized aircraft that had landed in the center of the foothold under Max's lead. Knight and the rest were sitting in the aircraft. The atmosphere seemed a little heavy. Ji Feihong and Hulanduo had suffered gunshot wounds. The gunshot wounds were not fatal, but they did not look well. When Celine arrived, Hulandu was in the middle of a conversation. "We're so well prepared this time mainly because of one person's suggestion. We did all these preparations just in case. I didn't expect him to be right in the end. Although we thought the possibility of a war was slim before this, we've now proven our speculation." "One person's suggestion?" "Who?" Knight asked. Hulanduo shook his head and said nothing. Cough, cough, cough. Hulanduo spat a mouthful of blood as he coughed. Meanwhile, Ji Feihong, who had been resting with his eyes closed next to him, lifted his hand and touched his nose. He looked at his fingers, which were covered in sticky blood. The blood was increasing, and it seemed like it could not stop. "You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.